It wasn't until a black longsword stabbed toward the space between my eyebrows that I knew this wasn't a dream. Just a few minutes earlier, I'd been asleep in my own home, but when I opened my eyes, I found myself lying on an unfamiliar wooden bed, with a long-haired woman beside me wearing nothing but a fox pelt. Her features were so perfect she hardly looked real. The instant I got a clear look at her face, her eyes flew open. She cried out and sprang to her feet, wrapping the fox pelt around herself in the same motion. The long sword hanging on the wall answered some invisible summons and flew straight into her hand. That was when I realized the bed wasn't the only thing that had changed. The walls around me were built from massive logs. Not a single piece of furniture was modern, and an enormous burning brazier hung from the ceiling. With the lightest push, the woman launched herself off the bed and landed without making a sound. She looked down to make sure the fox pelt covered her body, then fixed me with a death stare. Shame, anger, suspicion, and murderous intent surfaced on her face one after another. I tried to explain that I'd only just woken up too, but every syllable she spoke was completely foreign to me. I pointed at myself, then at the bed, repeatedly miming the act of waking up. She only pulled the fox pelt tighter around herself as the sword's scabbard trembled against the wall. A moment later, the black longsword lifted off its hook and flew directly into her palm. That killed my last desperate hope that this was some elaborate historical costume prank. I scrambled off the bed and lunged for the door. I couldn't understand a word of her language, but the meaning on that icy face couldn't have been clearer. She wanted to kill me. The moment I pulled the door open, a blast of bone-chilling wind hit me head-on. The log cabin stood halfway up a mountain, surrounded by a snow-covered forest that stretched beyond the horizon. The peaks and ancient trees were all abnormally huge. Nothing in sight belonged to any world I knew. The snow nearly covered my ankles, and every breath instantly became a cloud of white vapor. I was wearing only the thin clothes I'd gone to bed in, and the cold pierced my skin like needles. In the distance, something smashed through an ancient tree. The dull crash of its fall carried across the entire valley. The ring of a sword closed in behind me. I turned. The sword's tip was barely an inch from my forehead. A desperate will to survive flooded my mind, leaving me with only one thought: home. I didn't even feel myself do anything. The air around me abruptly tightened, as if an unseen hand had seized me and ripped me out of that spot. In the next instant, the cabin, the snowy mountain, and the woman all vanished. I crashed heavily onto my own bed. Everything in my room was exactly as I'd left it, except for the scrap of white fabric clutched in my hand. It was the intimate garment I'd torn from the woman's body moments ago. The air conditioner was still blowing cool air, and car horns sounded outside my window. In a single second, the temperature and noise of two worlds had switched completely. I touched the spot between my eyebrows. There was no wound, but my fingers wouldn't stop trembling. If I'd been even a heartbeat slower, that piece of cloth might not have been the only thing to come back with me. It proved that everything I'd just experienced was real, but traveling between worlds, a snowy mountain, a flying sword. None of it could be explained. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that something had gone wrong with my mind. Without even dressing properly, I grabbed the cloth and ran to the neighborhood clinic. The clinic belonged to my aunt, Zhang Yali. She had studied both Western and traditional Chinese medicine, and she was the only person I could think of asking for help. I burst inside wearing nothing but a pair of shorts and sat down in front of her. "Auntie, I think I might be sick. I suddenly found myself in a frozen wilderness just now, and there was a woman with a sword." Zhang Yali looked me up and down, then reached out to feel my forehead. "No fever, but running around the neighborhood in broad daylight wearing only shorts. I'd say you're definitely pretty sick." The two people in the waiting area turned to look at me at the same time. Only then did I realize I wasn't even wearing slippers, and I was still clutching the white cloth in my hand. My aunt pulled the consultation room door halfway closed, then asked if I'd been drinking, doing drugs, or going without sleep for several days. I snatched the white lab coat off the wall, wrapped it around myself, and hurried to explain. "I'm not joking. That woman nearly killed me with one swing of her sword. I even brought back proof." I told her everything, from the snow in the log cabin to the woman summoning a sword through the air. The longer Zhang Yali listened, the more she looked at me as if I'd escaped from a psychiatric ward. She even asked whether the stress of job hunting had gotten to me and if I'd been staying up night after night. "I'm completely lucid." I held out my hand. "That sword was 1 inch from here. Look." My hand is still shaking. "Then the first thing you need to do is put on some clothes." She pulled the lapels of the lab coat closed for me. "There are patients in the clinic." Zhang Yali didn't believe a word of it. She decided I'd been single for so long that I'd finally started hallucinating about women. She even laughed and told me that as long as the girl was respectable, the family would support me. She listened to my heartbeat with a stethoscope, then made me hold out my hands, move my eyes, and tell her the date, when every test came back normal. She concluded that stress and a nightmare were to blame. The more I insisted that the woman had been real, the more her expression suggested she was deciding whether to call a psychiatrist. After ID spent ages explaining, she turned away to change another patient's dressing. I had no choice but to give up. If someone had told me a story that bizarre, I wouldn't have believed it either. But as I walked out of the clinic, I suddenly realized my hand was empty. The cloth ID brought back from the other world was gone. Without it, had I really traveled to another world? Or had I actually lost my mind? I had to find that intimate garment from the other world. It was the only proof that I hadn't gone insane. I raced home and tore my bedroom apart. But couldn't find so much as a single thread, just as panic began to set in. My mother walked in, wiping a table with the very piece of white cloth I was looking for. I dethroned the sheets onto the floor and ransacked the wardrobe, standing in the doorway. My mother first scolded me for never cleaning my room, then used the cloth to wipe the dust from the corner of my desk. The moment I recognized its hand-stitched pattern, I nearly threw myself at her. "Mom, that thing in your hand, where did you get it?" "It's just a rag I picked up." She glanced at me. "Your aunt said you were streaking through the neighborhood. What on earth happened?" I had no time to explain. I stared at the now filthy cloth, which even had a tear across it, and my heart sank. When my mother saw my expression, she balled it up and tossed it to me. I caught it, immediately pushed her out of my room, and told her Zhang Yali had misunderstood. My mother kept asking through the door whether losing my job had driven me over the edge. I locked it, spread the cloth beneath the light, and inspected it carefully. The frayed edges weren't clean, and even like fabric cut by a modern machine. The material itself was rough, as if it had been hand-woven, and it still carried the faint smoky fragrance of that log cabin. Every detail told me it did not belong in this room. Once the door was shut, I spread the cloth out again. It was damaged, but it undeniably existed. That meant the cabin, the snowy mountain, and the sword-wielding woman hadn't been hallucinations. I photographed both sides with my phone, then sealed it in a clear bag. Photos could be faked, but a physical object could be tested for its fibers and craftsmanship. If I could take it back to the cabin, then my journey between worlds would no longer be a one-time accident. It would be an ability I could use again and again. The moment that thought crossed my mind, my bedroom warped before my eyes. 1 second later, I was standing inside the log cabin again. No one was there, and the black sword was gone from the wall. A gigantic brazier hung overhead. Crude wooden furniture stood in the corners, and 3 flawless fox pelts with a strange luster lay across the bed. This place was utterly different from Earth. I didn't touch the pelts. Their potential value mattered far less than whether I could get home again. The last time, I'd been on the verge of death. I'd focused on getting home. And then the crossing had happened. Maybe thought itself was the switch. I closed my eyes and concentrated on my bedroom. Nothing happened the first time. I forced down every stray thought and focused even harder on going home. I felt as if I were passing through an invisible barrier. Then I was back beside my bed. It worked. I tested it several more times. It was as if an invisible door now connected my bedroom and the cabin. A door that belonged to me alone. As long as my intent was firm enough, I could pass through it in an instant. On my third return, I deliberately stood in another corner of the bedroom, but I still arrived beside the bed. When I changed positions inside the cabin and then came back, my arrival point on Earth remained the same. I also timed the crossings with my phone. Each transition took less than a second, and there was no obvious difference in the flow of time between the two worlds. More importantly, my clothes and anything in my hands could travel with me. The torn white cloth had been the first proof. To confirm the rules, I tried taking a glass of water with me. It reached the cabin without a problem and returned with me just as easily. Next came a book and a coat. Nothing was lost. I poured a little water onto the cabin floor, then crossed back and confirmed that the missing water hadn't magically returned to the glass. After that, I took over a backpack stuffed with odds and ends. The backpack and everything inside it traveled as one, which meant the power wasn't counting individual objects. Its limits seemed to depend on what I could personally carry. I also discovered that every crossing brought me to one of 2 fixed locations: my bedroom on Earth or the area beside the wooden bed in the other world. As long as I remained conscious, traveling back and forth took almost no time. But if my intent wavered, the crossing wouldn't happen. That meant I could transport objects, but I couldn't afford to lose focus in a dangerous situation. If I came under a real attack, the difference between life and death would be whether I could concentrate in time. Since graduating from college, I struck out everywhere I applied and had spent more than half a year sitting at home. My ex-girlfriend had also left me for a rich man's son, but now, a path to an entirely different world had suddenly opened before me. For the past few months, I'd woken up every day with no idea what to do. Every resume I sent seemed to vanish into the void. My family never said anything, but the worry in their eyes grew more obvious by the day. At least now there was something only I could do. I wrote down the objects I'd brought back and the rules of crossing in an old notebook, then sealed the torn cloth in a bag and hid it at the very back of my closet. If this secret ever got out, I might lose my freedom. I might even become someone's research subject. I didn't save any records on an internet-connected device. Instead, I wrote the dates, arrival points, carrying tests, and failure conditions in the old notebook. At the very top of the first page, I wrote a single warning: never cross in front of another person. Never leave evidence of my identity on Earth in the other world. Never reveal an otherworldly object without good reason. The danger was real, but so was the opportunity. I looked at my winter clothes and made my decision. The next time I crossed over, I would leave the cabin and see that world with my own eyes. I put on a down jacket and returned to the cabin. Shrill cries and the crash of falling trees echoed constantly in the distance, but I opened the door anyway. This time, I hadn't arrived by accident. I brought my phone, a stun baton, and thick gloves. With a folding knife tucked into my pocket, they might not be enough to deal with that woman, but at least I wouldn't be completely unprepared. Wind drove the snow against my face. 3 steps outside the door, I looked up and saw a massive planet hanging in the sky. Its outline, far larger than the moon, appeared from Earth. There was no possible way this was Earth. The planet occupied a vast portion of the sky. I could even make out bands of clouds and dark land masses across its surface. On the far side of the snowy forest, a beast let out a long, deep howl that made my chest feel tight. I raised my phone and recorded the view. The sight remained on the screen, proving it wasn't an illusion created by my eyes. Before I could recover from my shock, a rope shot at me from the side and coiled around my arms and legs like a living creature. It tightened until I couldn't even lift my wrists. The woman stood on the roof. She had clearly been lying in wait for a long time. This wasn't ordinary hemp rope. The more I struggled, the tighter it became, and a faint light shimmered across its surface. I tried to reach the stun baton at my waist, but my wrist moved barely half an inch before the rope cinched down. She had obviously learned from our first encounter. This time, she had no intention of letting me get close to her or escape through the door. The woman stood atop the roof, dressed now in a long white gown. The black longsword hung at her waist as she stared coldly down at me. She leaped from the roof, more than 12 feet above the ground, and landed on the snow without leaving a single footprint. For the first time, I truly understood that she was far stronger than an ordinary person. She walked up to me and asked a question I still couldn't understand, perhaps because the rope hadn't frightened me enough for her liking. She placed one hand on the hilt of her sword. I repeated the word misunderstanding several times, then pointed to the cabin and myself, trying to show that I hadn't deliberately broken in. She frowned, clearly unable to understand me. She used the tip of her sword to pull open my down jacket and check for hidden weapons. The folding knife and stun baton fell onto the snow. She recognized neither object, but she didn't touch them right away. I quickly shook my head, trying to show her they wouldn't hurt anyone on their own. My gaze accidentally dropped to her chest. Her expression instantly turned glacial. Only an inch of the blade slid from its scabbard, but I could already feel its chill against my skin. I didn't dare remain there any longer. I activated my power at once. My body vanished from inside the rope. A second later, I was back in my bedroom. Cold sweat had soaked my back. That woman could summon a sword through the air and walk across snow without leaving footprints. Killing me would take her only one move. Yet instead of attacking immediately, she captured me with a rope first. That meant she also wanted to find out where I'd come from. I inspected the stun baton and folding knife again and realized they were nearly useless against her. If I kept bringing conspicuous weapons, I would only convince her that I was an enemy. My next attempt shouldn't focus on how to defeat her. I needed to find a way to stop her from drawing her sword before I could explain myself. I wrote down each of her reactions in order. First, she covered her body. Then she created distance, and only then did she attack. She had clear reasons for her anger. She wasn't someone who killed strangers on sight. If I compensated her for the garment, explained that ID entered by accident, and found a way to communicate. There was still a chance to turn the situation around. The problem was that we didn't share a language. After thinking for a long time, I decided to begin with a gesture of goodwill. There happened to be a picture of a smiling face beside my printer. I picked it up, crossed over, dropped it onto the snow, and returned immediately. I stayed for less than a second. Her sword had barely begun to rise before I was back in my bedroom. The picture didn't return with me, which proved that an object would remain in the other world once I let go of it. That rule meant I could test her reaction from a safe distance. It also meant I could never afford to drop anything valuable in a panic. This time, she didn't attack. When I appeared briefly for a second time, I saw that she picked up the sheet of paper. Suspicion had given way to confusion. At the very least, she didn't seem to interpret the smile as a provocation. One picture wasn't enough. There was a lollipop on my desk. I drew a simple picture of a little girl licking a piece of candy, then sent the drawing and the lollipop through together. The next time I flashed into view, I saw that she hadn't destroyed the smiling face. She was still holding it in one hand. When the lollipop fell, she prodded the wrapper with the tip of her sword, examining it as warily as if it were a concealed weapon. I unwrapped an identical lollipop in front of her, put it in my mouth, and pushed the other one toward her. She didn't eat it right away. She smelled its sweetness, then put it away with the drawing. At least she understood that I wasn't throwing a weapon at her. At least she was willing to study my gifts. I was also beginning to understand that she hadn't attacked me the first time without reason. ID inexplicably appeared in her bed and taken an intimate garment from her body. From her point of view, I was the suspicious and dangerous intruder. Afterward, I waited in my bedroom for more than 10 minutes. Every second dragged by. If she understood my meaning, perhaps we could talk the next time we met. If she misunderstood, that sword would still be waiting for me. I prepared to cross for the third time. This time, I wasn't going to drop something and run. I needed to stand in front of her and find out exactly who she was. I ordered an entire box of white underwear in several different sizes to replace the garment ID brought home, to keep the woman from drawing her sword again. I also put on my down jacket and a helmet, then hung the high-voltage stun baton from my belt. There was no chance of finding the same handmade fabric at a store downstairs, so I could only choose a modern product that served the closest function. I insisted on white and picked the simplest designs I could find, in case she mistook any decorative patterns for having some special meaning. I knew nothing about women's sizes, so I relied on my memory and chose several of the larger options that seemed close. I paid extra for same-day delivery when customer service repeatedly asked me to confirm the sizes. I was so embarrassed I wanted to close the chat window on the spot, but I had to compensate her. Only after I resolved this issue would she have any reason to believe my goodwill. When my mother pushed open the door, she nearly decided I was a lunatic. She felt my down jacket, looked out at the blazing midsummer sun, and asked whether I'd taken a job in a cold storage warehouse. I barely managed to brush her off by saying I was filming a video with friends. Only after she left did I dare activate my power. Once ID finally coaxed her out and locked the bedroom door, I took the delivery box and crossed to the snowy mountain. The woman was waiting for me on a tree stump. The smiling face ID sent overlay beside her. The lollipop had been unwrapped, and a ring of candy was missing. She had eaten it, and it hadn't poisoned her, as far as I was concerned. That was the best sign possible. The black sword was still within easy reach. But the rope didn't fly at me again. I slowly spread my hands, set down the delivery box, and took out an unopened lollipop. She glanced at the stun baton on my belt, but eventually removed her hand from her sword. As soon as she stood, I instinctively backed up several steps and raised the little white flag ID prepared. She had no idea what it meant, so I put it away and took out another lollipop instead. I mean you no harm. I only want to be friends. Her eyes visibly brightened, and she asked me something. Strangely enough, this time her pronunciation sounded very similar to a Sichuan dialect. I immediately switched to the Bashu accent I knew. This is called a lollipop. So it really is candy. Her reply was halting, but I could understand it. It is much sweeter than the candy we have here. The language barrier had suddenly cracked open. I handed her several different flavors. When she accepted them, the murderous intent finally faded from her face. Perhaps the candy had somehow triggered an opportunity for communication. Or perhaps our languages shared similar ancient sounds to begin with. I had no idea why it worked. All I could do was keep my sentences short and repeat the key words. Her speech sounded like a dialect mixed with unfamiliar terms. Whenever I failed to understand, we filled in the gaps with gestures. I seized the opportunity to ask, "What is this place?" "Mount Lu." "What country is Mount Lu in?" She shook her head. "It does not belong to any country." "Who are you?" "Are you an immortal?" When she said Mount Lu, she pointed toward the snowy ridges outside. I asked whether there were any towns nearby and why she lived alone. But she understood only part of what I said. Neither of us seemed fluent in the Bashu dialect we were using, and we had to speak every sentence very slowly. She told me the nearest settlement was called Qingfeng Town, but couldn't he give me a precise distance when I said the word country? She paused for a long time. People here apparently spoke in terms of dynasties and territories instead. From those few sentences, all I could confirm was that the cabin lay deep in the mountains, far from civilization. Even so, this was far better than understanding nothing at all. I immediately denied being an immortal. But she pointed at the place where ID appeared and asked how an ordinary mortal could come and go without leaving a trace. My ability to cross worlds was my greatest secret. I offered no explanation and changed the subject instead. "Are you hungry? How about I buy you dinner?" She nodded. I asked her to wait, crossed back to my bedroom, and left the cumbersome helmet and delivery box behind. Then I grabbed 2 cups of instant noodles from the kitchen. Seconds later, I reappeared in front of her. She had watched me vanish and return with her own eyes, which only strengthened her suspicion that I was an immortal. I didn't take advantage of it by agreeing. I didn't even understand how my own power worked. If I used a false identity to intimidate her, more questions would expose the lie sooner or later. She stared at the paper cups in my hands, her eyes filled with equal parts caution and curiosity. I peeled open the wrapping and told her with a smile, "These are instant noodles. All you need is hot water, and they'll be ready in a few minutes." She turned and led me into the cabin. When she lifted the lid from the pot on the stove, the rich fragrance of ginseng washed over me. Soaking in the hot water was an old mountain ginseng root as thick as a daikon radish. I suddenly realized that the most valuable part of this meal might not be the instant noodles at all. The radish in the pot had to be at least 100 years old. Yet the woman was using it merely to boil water. The root was reddish-brown, with a maze of branching tendrils. Wisps of milky white essence floated in the hot broth. Once she removed the lid, the aroma became so intense it felt as though it could seep directly into my lungs. I'd seen gift boxes of ginseng on Earth, but most of the roots inside had been no thicker than a finger. The one before me was nearly as thick as my arm. Its weight and condition put it in a completely different league. Even more astonishingly, she hadn't sliced or weighted. She simply soaked the entire root in the pot and boiled it again and again. If this truly was wild mountain ginseng, the water in this pot alone might cost more than several months of my living expenses. Suppressing my shock, I emptied the seasoning into both cups of noodles and added the ginseng broth. The hot soup mingled with the seasoning, producing an aroma many times richer than ordinary instant noodles. She had never seen a block of dried noodles and didn't know how to use a plastic fork. I opened my own cup first and showed her how to lift the noodles. She learned quickly, though her eyes remained fixed on the steam rising beneath the lid. I also showed her the powdered seasoning, oil packet, and dehydrated vegetables separately, explaining that the wrappers couldn't go into the pot. The oil packet clearly fascinated her. She squeezed and examined it several times, apparently unable to understand why something so thin didn't leak. She waited beside the cups and tried to lift the lids more than once. I had to remind her that the noodles needed a few more minutes. "This food must be very precious, is it not?" she asked. "It's completely ordinary where I come from." The way she looked at me changed at once. She was obviously even more convinced that I came from a place of unimaginable wealth. I didn't explain. My attention remained on the pot. I asked what she normally ate, aside from snow chickens and other game. She brought a little coarse grain into the mountains, most of the time. She survived on meat broth and banchue. What truly appealed to her about instant noodles wasn't just the flavor. They also required no long simmering, for someone who lived and cultivated alone for long periods. Food ready within minutes of adding boiling water was genuinely convenient. That made me reevaluate the value of everything we might trade. A cup of noodles that cost only a few yuan on Earth could save her fuel and time. A ginseng root she used to flavor water might save a life on Earth. Price wasn't determined by cost alone. It depended just as much on the circumstances in which something was used. "What do you call the thing you boil in the water, banchue?" People in town also call it earth spirit. So the banchue she spoke of was ginseng. Apparently, people on Mount Lu didn't consider it particularly rare. I asked her to compare a banchue with an ordinary tree root. She pointed out the 5-part compound leaves, the rhizome crown, and the fine rootlets, then explained that the older one grew, the more human its shape became. I took close-up photos of every feature with my phone, so I wouldn't return to Earth unable to identify even the species. The root before me wasn't tea, a radish ID misidentified by appearance. It was a medicinal plant the locals had consumed for generations. She also told me that wild beasts searched for bonchuay in the mountains. Young roots could only replenish blood and vitality, while old ones could aid cultivation. Truly ancient ginseng wasn't tea something just anyone could dig up when she called it common. She meant that the depths of Mount Lu provided the right environment for it to grow, not that anyone could pull one from the ground outside the cabin. How many years has this one been growing? She glanced at it. I do not know. They are common in the mountains, whenever I am thirsty or have exhausted too much blood and vitality. I dig one up and boil it in water. The more casually she spoke, the harder it became for me to remain calm. On Earth, collectors fought over medicinal herbs like this. Here, they were nothing more than everyday supplies. When the noodles were ready, I took the first bite. The ginseng broth had transformed a cup of cheap instant noodles into something extraordinarily delicious. She imitated me and tasted a mouthful, then lowered her head and barely spoke again. In moments, her cup was empty. I couldn't help laughing, with a sword in her hand. This woman could be terrifyingly cold. When she ate, however, she showed no reserve at all. She looked at the half cup I had left, so I simply handed it to her. At first she shook her head, saying it was my share. I pushed the cup to her side of the table and took a sip of ginseng broth instead. Only then did she accept it. She didn't leave so much as a drop of soup. Afterward, she placed the paper cup neatly in the corner of the table, evidently fascinated even by the container. I've already eaten from it. Take it if you don't mind. She accepted it and kept eating, just as I was about to ask her name. A surge of heat suddenly welled up inside me. It spread from my stomach into my limbs. It felt as though someone had stuffed a furnace inside my down jacket. I yanked open the zipper, but sweat continued pouring out. She realized something was wrong and pointed at the ginseng in the pot, then gestured that I shouldn't drink too much. Her warning came too late. My skin grew hotter and hotter, and my nose began to burn. I touched it and found my fingertips covered in blood. It was the ginseng broth. Even after removing my down jacket, I felt as though I were standing inside a steamer, and my vision began to turn red. She seized my wrist and examined me for a moment. Confusion gave way to surprise. To her, the broth was merely a mild tonic. Inside my body, it was like a spark dropped onto a pile of dry kindling. Perhaps years of drinking it had made her immune, but my body couldn't withstand it. A moment later, my stomach churned so violently I could barely remain on my feet. I need to leave for a moment. There was no time to say more. I crossed back to my bedroom and sprinted for the bathroom. Clutching my stomach, that half cup of ginseng broth rampaged through my body like a ball of fire. I had no idea whether it would make me stronger or put me in the hospital first, but one thing was already certain. The bonchuay that grew throughout Mount Lu could be worth a staggering amount of money on Earth, as long as I survived long enough to digest this meal. My life was about to change completely. I spent a long time suffering in the bathroom. The waste coming out of me smelled so foul I could barely breathe. Worse yet, the stench wasn't only coming from the toilet. A layer of sticky black grime was seeping from my skin. For a while, I thought I'd developed food poisoning. I was about to call an ambulance when my hand stopped over the phone. If a hospital found some inexplicable compound in my test results, I would never be able to explain where that soup had come from. Fortunately, although the stomach pain was severe, I remained conscious, and my pulse didn't continue racing out of control. After the diarrhea finally ended, my entire body felt weak. But my heartbeat was stronger than usual. Most of the black grime had collected around my pores and joints, as if my body were expelling years of accumulated impurities all at once. I washed myself 4 times with body wash and soap before the grime finally came off. The black filth clogged the shower drain twice. As I rinsed it away, I kept checking for rashes, bleeding, or difficulty breathing. Once the grime was gone, there were no wounds on my skin. Instead, the heaviness in my joints gradually disappeared. Then I caught sight of my face in the mirror and froze. The acne scars and dark spots that had once marked my skin were gone, leaving it smooth and clear. I didn't merely look far more energetic. My entire body felt lighter than it ever had before. That pot of ginseng broth really had improved my body. I took all the money I had left, 62 yuan, and went to the supermarket downstairs to buy a large bag of instant noodles, lollipops, and chocolate. If I could trade them for even one old ginseng root from Mount Lu, that tiny investment would be nothing. The most ordinary products on the shelves had suddenly acquired a completely different meaning. I chose items with long shelf lives, intact packaging, and flavors that would be easy to enjoy, then added several bottles of mineral water. My wallet was completely empty after checkout, yet ID never walked home from a shopping trip with more confidence. At the register, I repeatedly removed things from my cart until I didn't even leave myself enough money for a proper dinner. Cheap food was all I had to offer right now, but the woman happened to love it. If she was willing to trade, that 62 yuan might buy me the first truly valuable object ID ever owned. When I crossed into the cabin again, the delivery box had already been opened. The underwear was arranged neatly on the table. The woman stood beside it holding her sword, an unusually awkward expression on her face. I offered her the food first. These are all for you. By the way, I still don't know your name. Wuchan Naga. I repeated it several times until I memorized the difficult name, then told her my own. When she tried to say Sui, in the Basha dialect, the words came out stiffly. I corrected her twice, but she continued to address me as young master. In her culture, calling an unfamiliar man directly by name was impolite. I tried to correct that as well, explaining that I had neither servants nor some wealthy clan behind me, but she believed that a man who could casually produce candy and glowing devices, then tear open space to come and go at will, couldn't he possibly be an ordinary commoner? She continued calling me young master, then studied my face. The bonchue had an obvious effect on you. I took the opportunity to ask, are there many of them on Mount Lu? There are quite a few in the mountains. Boiling them in water replenishes blood and vitality and increases strength. Could you give me one? Wuchan Naga agreed without hesitation. She took a cloth bundle from beside the stove. Inside was a mountain ginseng root, even thicker and older than the one in the pot. It had to weigh more than a pound. She showed no reluctance whatsoever as she offered it to me. I was the one who asked twice whether I could truly take it. Only after she confirmed it did I place the root on a clean piece of cloth, carefully supporting the main body and its web of tendrils so I wouldn't snap even the finest rootlet. Its rich fragrance filled my nose. I knew nothing about appraising ginseng, but even I understood that a specimen like this could never be cheap on earth. Almost none of the rootlets were damaged, and damp soil still clung to the root, proving it had been dug up recently. I once heard the old saying, 7 liang makes true ginseng, 8 liang makes a treasure. The root before me weighed far more than 8 liang. I didn't cross back immediately. If I accepted something from her, I needed to make it clear that I would honor my side of the exchange. I left all the instant noodles, candy, and chocolate in the cabin and promised to bring more in the future. After carefully putting away the ginseng, my attention returned to the ginseng water in the pot. Wuchan Naga ladled out a bowl and handed it to me. I took only 3 sips before my body began heating up again. She immediately snatched the bowl back and warned me that my constitution was too weak. 3 sips a day was the limit. Any more would throw my blood and vitality out of balance. She also had me sit down and breathe slowly, waiting for the heat to spread into my limbs before I moved. My humiliation the first time had already proven that greed would only injure me. I accepted her warning. Even the greatest treasure was useless if I didn't live long enough to enjoy it. Then I pointed to the underwear on the table. Last time, I accidentally took one of your garments. These are to replace it. Wuchan Naga blushed. I know they are for women, but I do not know how to wear them. I froze as well. Teaching her in person would only make the situation even more embarrassing. But if I didn't explain, I'd have given her an entire box of useless fabric. I took out my phone and prepared to find an illustration. The moment the screen lit up, Wuchan Naga forgot about the underwear and focused entirely on the thin, glowing slab in my hand. I enlarged the dressing illustration ID saved in advance and pointed out the clasps and shoulder straps. As soon as she understood, she put the box away and refused to let me say another word. We both breathed a sigh of relief. At last, ID made amends for the awkwardness of our first meeting. She asked whether an eternally burning lamp had been sealed inside the device. An even more pressing problem was the ancient ginseng root hidden inside my coat, a root that might be worth a fortune. Once I returned to Earth, I needed to find someone trustworthy and learn exactly how much it was worth. I suddenly thought of a way to explain without demonstrating on myself. I took out my phone and showed Wuchan Naga a picture of a woman modeling underwear. The moment the screen lit up, she recoiled half a step. Why is there a person trapped inside? It's only a picture. This is called a phone. It lets people speak to one another across great distances. She touched the screen tentatively with one fingertip, then jerked her hand back when the image changed beneath my swipe to prove there wasn't a real person inside. I closed the gallery and reopened it. Then I switched to the camera so both she and the cabin appeared on the screen. She looked behind me to make sure no painter was hiding there, then turned the phone over and searched the back for some kind of mechanism. I pressed the shutter, and the cabin she'd just seen instantly became a still image. She compared the brazier on the screen to the real one overhead several times before she finally believed that this thin slab could capture an image in an instant. Where I come from, people use devices like this to transmit voices and images, I said, but after I leave that world, it can't contact anyone. Only its other functions still work. She called the phone an immortal artifact for transmitting voices across 1,000 miles. Then pointed to my stun baton. I switched it on and let an arc of electricity dance briefly across the tip. The blue-white sparks and sharp crackling made her grip her sword, but she quickly understood that the black rod could store lightning. I didn't boast about my own strength. I merely explained that people on Earth excelled at making tools. They couldn't use lightness skills and rarely cultivated their bodies, but they could fly 10,000 miles in airplanes, see distant objects through telescopes, and even destroy mountains with weapons. She asked whether an airplane was an enormous flying sword. I had no choice but to draw wings and a passenger cabin on paper. Then she asked how advanced someone's cultivation had to be to wield a mountain-destroying weapon. I told her it relied on manufacturing and cooperation, not one person's true chi. That answer left her silent for a long time. Wuchan Naga remained skeptical. She could tell my body was weak, yet my phone, stun baton, and ability to cross space were beyond anything she understood. In the end, she stopped asking questions and simply called my home the upper realm. I described the phone in terms she could understand, calling it a device for transmitting voices across 1,000 miles. She immediately asked how far it could transmit, temporarily forgetting even the underwear on the table. Thousands or even tens of thousands of miles. But right now, I'm only using it to show you how to wear this. Once Wuchan Naga understood, she took the garments behind a folding screen. When she emerged a little later, she moved much more comfortably. She had clearly discovered that modern underwear felt better than binding her chest. She looked again at my phone and the stun baton on my belt, then asked whether both were immortal artifacts. I stopped trying to correct her. People on Earth might be physically far weaker than the martial artists here, but airplanes could carry them thousands of miles. Telescopes could bring faraway objects into view, and modern weapons could destroy mountains and cities. To her, the simplest explanation was that technology was merely another kind of immortal artifact. Nor did I intend to reveal everything about Earth. Letting her retain a little awe could only benefit someone as pitifully weak as I was now. Why do you live alone on a snowy mountain? I asked. Wuchan Naga told me she came to Mount Lu every year for secluded cultivation, away from the distractions of the mundane world. Once her retreat ended, she would return to Qingfeng town in the north. How long does the retreat last? Normally 2 or 3 months. I practice my swordsmanship, circulate my chi, and take care of certain matters in the mountains while I am here. She didn't explain what those matters in the mountains were. She only said that once the wind and snow settled, she occasionally traveled deeper into the range. I made a note of that. She wasn't living in the cabin because she had nowhere else to go. She was pursuing some long-term objective. Her father was the garrison commander of Qingfeng town. The Wuchan family operated several merchant houses there and had passed them down for more than 200 years. Only then did I understand. She wasn't some ordinary hunter living alone in the wilderness. She was the eldest daughter of the town's most powerful family. She had practiced martial arts since childhood, and her family lacked neither servants nor guards. Yet she'd come to Mount Lu with only a sword and a bow. The cabin's primitive life wasn't a sign of poverty. It was a form of cultivation she'd deliberately chosen. No wonder she didn't know how to care for another person but treated the beasts of the snowy mountain as an everyday nuisance. I continued asking about the lands beyond the mountain. North of Mount Lu lay the kingdom of Nanling. Its territory contained 9 provinces, 24 commanderies, and 72 towns. Qingfeng town was only a remote settlement near Mount Lu. Nanling itself was a vassal of the far more powerful Great Zhou dynasty. Great Zhou had other vassal states as well, including Shiping, Chunshan, Qingshang, East Sea, and Jianbei. Beyond Great Zhou lay even larger dynasties such as Yin, Qin, and Yuanlong. I entered each name into the notes on my phone. This world's administrative system resembled ancient China, yet it matched no known period. Nanling was merely a vassal kingdom. Qingfeng was only one of its 72 towns. And Mount Lu lay even farther out, near the very edge of the map. I asked her to sketch the directions on paper, marking Qingfeng town, Anyang, and Shangjing with circles. The scale was inaccurate, but it at least showed me that Mount Lu wasn't the end of the world. It was a vast mountain range dividing several regions. Beyond the snowy ridges in front of me were countless people and goods I'd never seen. When Wuchan Naga spoke of Shangjing, longing appeared in her eyes for the first time. Merchants, martial artists, and great clans from many nations gathered there, and it was said to be the most prosperous city in the world. The farthest Wuchan Naga had ever traveled was Anyang, the capital of Nanling. She hoped that one day she could visit Shangjing, the capital of Great Zhou. After hearing all this, my ambitions were no longer limited to one cabin and a few ginseng roots. This world had towns, trade routes, nations, and a vast system of wealth. If I could travel safely between the two worlds, then ordinary goods from Earth might be exchanged here for unimaginable resources. I asked when she could take me away from Mount Lu. After thinking for a moment, she gave me an answer. 2 months from now, 2 months from now. Wuchan Naga would first take me to Qingfeng town. From there, we could travel with a merchant caravan to other towns, or even to Anyang, the capital of Nanling. I agreed. As the sky darkened, I noticed that she was clearly uncomfortable with the idea of sharing a cabin with me. So I voluntarily returned to Earth. It was just after 5 in the afternoon. Time seemed synchronized between the two worlds, even though one was in the middle of summer and the other was buried beneath winter snow. I compared the time on my phone with the clock in my bedroom, then spent 10 minutes in each world. When I returned, the difference was negligible. The seasons were complete opposites, but time flowed at the same speed. That meant I couldn't hide in one world for months, nor could I let my family on Earth go too long without hearing from me. I hid the old ginseng root in my closet. If I kept crossing and carrying objects back and forth, my family would eventually discover my secret. I needed to move out as soon as possible. My mother refused to give me any money, so I went to the clinic to see my aunt. Lend me 2,000 yuan. I want to rent a place and start living on my own. At first, Zhang Yali suspected I had some ulterior motive. I took advantage of that and told her moving out would make it easier for me to meet a new girl. Not only did she agree, she transferred 3,000 yuan to me on the spot. First, she asked whether I'd found a job, then calculated my rent, utilities, and food expenses. I gave her vague answers to every question, and she was already preparing to refuse. It was only when she heard the words, "Get a girlfriend," that she changed her mind. She also demanded that I send her the address once I'd found a place. As she transferred the money, she scolded me for never repaying anything I'd borrowed before. At the same time, she worried that a grown man shouldn't be left without emergency cash. The extra 1,000 yuan was for my living expenses. I promised I'd pay her back. But inwardly, I became even more desperate to turn the old ginseng into money. If crossing worlds failed to earn me an income, I wouldn't even be able to keep the apartment. For the moment, however, the money solved my immediate problem. I contacted my childhood friend, Cheng Hao. His father's lumber mill was struggling and about to be sold, so Cheng Hao was temporarily staying there to look after it. One of his relatives happened to have a single unit for rent. When he heard I needed a place, he quickly negotiated the monthly rent down to 450 yuan. When Cheng Hao heard I was moving, his first question was whether I'd fought with my mother again. I only said I wanted more freedom and told him not to be nosy. 5 minutes later, he sent me the landlord's phone number and address. The rental was in an urban village only 3 subway stops from home. It wasn't large, but it had a bedroom, a living room, and a private bathroom. Most importantly, the landlord didn't live in the same building and wouldn't watch the tenants come and go every day. I checked the locks, curtains, and security cameras in the hallway first. The bedroom had enough room for a large cabinet, and the living room could hold a wine vat. The window faced another wall, so no neighbor could look directly inside. The place was old, but it was far better suited than my family home for concealing a fixed arrival point. I viewed the apartment, paid the rent, and received the keys that same day. While signing the lease, I confirmed that the landlord would contact me only to collect rent or arrange repairs, and retain no right to enter whenever he pleased. The water and electricity meters were separate. Deliveries could be left downstairs, and large items could be moved in without passing through the landlord's living room. To an ordinary tenant, these were conveniences. To me, they were the foundations for protecting my arrival point. I sent the address to my mother and aunt so my sudden move wouldn't create even more suspicion, but I didn't tell them what I planned to keep in the bedroom. Knowing where I lived didn't give my family the right to enter without boundaries. After I changed the lock cylinder, I kept only one spare key. The landlord had originally asked for 1 month's deposit and 3 months' rent in advance. I explained that I'd just graduated, and Cheng Hao vouched for me. In the end, he agreed to let me pay monthly with no deposit. After handing over 450 yuan, I still had more than 2,500 left when the key dropped into my palm. I had a secret space of my own for the first time. I didn't immediately try to change my arrival point. First, I would set up the necessities for everyday life, then test whether the fixed location moved with my residence. My ability had given me a door. Keeping it safe would depend on ordinary locks, curtains, and caution. When Chung Hao arrived, I dragged him to the farmer's market. I wanted to buy a large vat that could hold 100 gin of liquor, along with 100 gin of undiluted, high-proof rice liquor. What do you need all that for? Chung Hao asked. I'm making medicinal liquor. He immediately mentioned our other childhood friend, Chen Ling. Her family had made liquor for generations and owned a shop in the market, so their product could be trusted. I didn't need ordinary drinking liquor. I needed pure grain-based rice liquor of at least 50% alcohol, with no water mixed in. The old ginseng contained plenty of moisture and could easily spoil if stored untreated. Soaking it in strong liquor would preserve its medicinal potency and make it easier to control how much I consumed each day. The mouth of the ceramic vat had to be wide enough for the whole root to fit through. The vessel couldn't have any cracks either. If 100 gin of liquor leaked into the apartment, I wouldn't even be able to explain it to the landlord. Chung Hao took me to 3 different vendors before we chose a glazed vat with a thick lid. Although Chung Hao was curious about where I found the medicinal herb, I told him to focus on finding the vat and liquor first. As we walked, we did the math. 100 gin of liquor and the large vat would consume most of the money I borrowed. The 3 of us had known one another since childhood and often spent time together through middle and high school. Around them, I didn't need an elaborate excuse for buying liquor. For now, however, I couldn't tell them about the ancient ginseng from another world. The moment my 2 friends saw it, they would inevitably ask its age and origin. I trusted them, but that didn't mean they could bear the danger that came with knowing my secret. At least until I could protect myself, the fewer people who knew, the better. Water boiled with ordinary ginseng had already purged filth from my body and improved both my skin and constitution. If I soaked the entire ancient root in strong liquor, perhaps I could preserve its potency for much longer. More importantly, I would be alone in the apartment. Starting tonight, this place wouldn't only be my home. It would also be my safe landing point between 2 worlds. Chung Hao and I had just reached the Chen family's liquor shop when Chen Ling called out to us from the back. Her hair was cut neatly at her ears, and she had always done everything with brisk efficiency. When she learned I'd just rented a place, she suggested buying groceries and having a meal there so she'd know where I lived. I was already hungry, so I put Chung Hao in charge of food while Chen Ling and I selected the liquor. Rows of wine jars filled the Chen family's shop, and the air was rich with the aroma of fermented grain. When Chen Ling heard I wanted to make a health tonic, she first asked whether the medicinal ingredient was a root, bark, or fruit, then recommended an alcohol strength based on its moisture content. She ladled out several kinds for me to smell and measured their alcohol content in front of me with a hydrometer. The 56% batch burned the most going down, but its grain aroma was clean. I knew nothing about distilling, but at least I could confirm she wasn't passing off some questionable homemade liquor as country moutai to fool a friend. I only told her it was a large ginseng root. She recommended 56% liquor and said the ceramic vat needed to be washed and thoroughly dried first. I also had to remove all surface moisture from the herb, or the flavor might spoil. When Chen Ling heard I wanted to make medicinal liquor, she recommended pure grain rice liquor at 56% alcohol. A ceramic vat large enough for 100 gin cost 40 yuan, while 100 gin of liquor cost 600. She even arranged for someone to deliver everything directly to the apartment. After the delivery arrived, the 3 of us gathered around disposable plates and cups to eat and drink. The huge vat and 100 gin of liquor occupied most of the living room. We ladled out 1 gin for a taste. It was clear and sharp on the tongue, without the thinness of liquor diluted with water. Chung Hao laughed at me for making health tonics at the age of 22. Chen Ling, however, seriously warned me not to drink medicinal liquor like ordinary alcohol just because it tasted good. I didn't yet know how quickly the Violet Dragon King ginseng would prove her right. After a few drinks, Chen Ling brought up my ex-girlfriend, Luna. She said rumors had been circulating about Luna's private life and health, and that her new rich boyfriend had dumped her the previous day. On the phone screen, Luna pounded on a car window while a crowd gathered to watch. I watched for barely 10 seconds before handing the phone back. Whom she chose and who later abandoned her no longer had anything to do with me. Chen Ling found a video in someone's social media feed. It showed Luna blocking the man's car and arguing with him, creating an ugly public scene. She also mentioned rumors that Luna had undergone tests at a hospital. There was no firm evidence, and I didn't want to spread gossip. I was simply grateful that our relationship had ended before it caused any real harm. Chung Hao worried that I still hadn't moved on and deliberately cursed her a few times. I told him to stop. The humiliation and resentment of the breakup remained. But they were nothing compared with the opportunity waiting in the other world. I took no pleasure in her misfortune. Truth or rumor, it no longer mattered. That relationship had ended long ago. Instead of brooding over it, I needed to focus on what lay before me. I once wanted desperately to prove she made a mistake by leaving me. Now I realized the best proof wasn't watching her life fall apart. It was moving forward with mine. The other world, the ancient ginseng, and the changes in my body had already sent my life down an entirely different path. Giving my attention back to an ex would only waste the door that had just opened. I told Ling to stop forwarding unconfirmed rumors about Luna's health. A breakup could be ugly, but someone's privacy still shouldn't become entertainment over drinks. Ling nodded and deleted the video. We returned to discussing the real problems facing the liquor shop and lumber mill. Don't mention her again. I already have a new goal. Chung Hao and Ling immediately demanded to know who it was. But I didn't answer. The image in my mind was Wuchan Naga standing in the snow. She was dangerous, powerful, and belonged to another world. A few bags of snacks would never be enough to bring me truly close to her. The next morning, my mother frightened me awake. She stood beside the bed staring for a long time. Then asked whether I had plastic surgery. After drinking the ginseng broth, my skin had grown fairer. My acne scars had disappeared, and my body seemed sturdier. If even the person who knew me best could see the difference at a glance. The effect had far exceeded my expectations. She pinched my cheek, then made me stand against the wall so she could check my height. I hadn't suddenly grown much taller, but my shoulders and back were straighter, making my entire body look naturally taller. I claimed I started sleeping early and exercising. My mother felt my arm and immediately pointed out that a few days of exercise couldn't produce a change like this. She wanted to take me to the clinic for blood work. So I told her my aunt had already examined me and found nothing wrong. I brushed her off by saying I'd been sleeping better lately. She didn't believe me at all, but couldn't think of a more reasonable explanation. My mother quickly remembered something else and told me to return the 3,000 yuan I'd borrowed from my aunt. I said the money had already gone toward the apartment and other purchases, and that I would move out today. You spent 3,000 yuan in one day. Her voice rose. I mixed the rent and my business supplies together in my explanation and carefully avoided mentioning the wine vat. The moment my mother heard I wanted to become independent, her attitude softened. Then she asked how I planned to feed myself. I said I'd come home for free meals whenever I ran out of money. She complained aloud, but she was already smiling. When she heard I was moving out on my own, she even volunteered to help me pack. I hurriedly refused. The ancient ginseng was still hidden in the closet, if she found it. I could never explain where it had come from. I deliberately stuffed several dirty shirts into the top of my suitcase and said I'd pack everything myself later. My mother put them down in disgust and went to the kitchen to find seasonings, bowls, and utensils for me. I seized the opportunity to transfer the wrapped ginseng into the lining at the bottom of my suitcase. I closed the door and buried the root beneath everything else. From now on, the power to cross worlds wasn't the only secret I had to protect. I also had to guard the first fortune it had brought me. As soon as I moved into the apartment, I began treating the ancient ginseng. I washed the soil from its rootlets, left it to air dry, then used charcoal heat to remove the remaining surface moisture slowly. The root's rich fragrance soon filled the room. I couldn't open the window too far, or the scent would drift into the hallway. But if I closed it completely, moisture would collect inside. I left only a narrow gap and ran a fan on its lowest setting. Every 10 minutes, I turned the main root, while the delicate tendrils lay on gauze to dry naturally in the shade. The process was harder than I'd expected. The tendrils were numerous and extremely fine. A stream of water that was even slightly too strong might break them. I had to remove the soil little by little with a soft brush, then hang the main root in a ventilated spot. The charcoal couldn't be too hot either. I slowly rotated the root from a safe distance until its surface was no longer damp, but its entire form remained intact. I poured the 100 jin of strong rice liquor into the clean vat, then lowered the ginseng into it. Fine white threads slowly spread from the root. As if its medicinal power were dissolving into the alcohol, the root didn't sink. It remained suspended in the vat, slowly drifting through the liquor. Pale threads spread outward from the fine tendrils. forming an entire layer within minutes. I photographed it up close. The fumes already carried a distinct ginseng aroma. Finally, I fitted the lid and sealed the gap with wax. Soon after, the ancient root entered the liquor. Thread-like wisps appeared in what had been a perfectly clear liquid. I recorded the changes and date with my phone and planned to document the color, smell, and condition of the ginseng every week. Without a professional formula, I didn't dare add other medicinal ingredients at random. This first batch would be a simple, single-ingredient ginseng liquor. Only after its potency stabilized would I consider giving it to anyone else. I labeled the vat with the date and a warning. No one was to drink it during the initial steeping period, and curious friends weren't allowed to sample it. Every day, I would only check for leaks, bubbles, or strange smells. The ginseng water had already proven its strength. Once the alcohol extracted the active compounds, the concentration might be even higher. Calling it health liquor was no excuse to become careless. I also rearranged the apartment for ventilation and fire safety. If 100 gene of high-proof liquor ever caught fire, the consequences would be far worse than losing the medicinal herb. Once I finished with the charcoal brazier, I removed it from the apartment and resolved never to heat anything near the wine vat again. The liquor needed to steep for at least 3 months when it was ready. Perhaps a tiny amount each day would continue improving my body, but improving my body wasn't enough. I'd already spent almost all my money. I needed to trade for something else I could sell on Earth. I didn't visit Wuchan Naga empty-handed. First, I went on a second shopping trip. In addition to instant noodles, ham sausages, steamed buns, soy milk, and assorted snacks, I bought matching undergarments, feminine hygiene products, and a bottle of perfume. Mass-produced goods found everywhere on Earth might seem even rarer than gold or silver to her. I separated the food and daily necessities into different bags, so a broken perfume bottle couldn't contaminate anything edible. I also printed simple diagrams showing the order in which each item should be used. We still faced a language barrier. Anything I could explain with a picture would spare us both from awkwardly gesturing back and forth. As I selected the gifts, I consciously avoided buying things that were merely novel. The feminine products would solve a practical problem. The perfume would test her reaction to a more refined commodity. The buns and soy milk would prove that Earth had more to offer than instant noodles. Spending 500 yuan still hurt. I had no income from gold nuggets yet, so every shopping trip ate into the money my aunt had lent me. I filled a travel backpack with the purchases, put on my winter gear, and crossed to the cabin. Wuchan Naga soon returned from outside. Snow clung to the ends of her hair, and the long sword in her hand was still unsheathed. She had clearly just finished practicing. I introduced each thing I brought. Her eyes lit up when she bit into a meat-filled bun, and surprise crossed her face when she drank the soy milk. When I reached the feminine products, she was embarrassed at first, but carefully put them away once she understood their purpose. I drew the instructions for the sanitary products on paper and didn't ask her to try them in front of me. Once she understood, she stored them in a wooden chest. Her expression remained unnatural, but she didn't become furious as she had during our first encounter. The change showed that she'd begun to see me as someone with whom she could discuss the practical details of life. The moment I sprayed the perfume, she forgot her caution entirely. Wuchan Naga turned the glass bottle over and examined it again and again. To her, perfectly clear, evenly shaped glass was already rare. The fragrance inside, which lasted for hours, seemed like an even more precious treasure. She pressed the sprayer once into the air. Fine mist spread through the firelight, and a delicate fragrance soon filled the entire cabin. She peered closely at the nozzle and asked why such a tiny opening turned water into mist. I removed the cap to show her, but didn't pretend the complicated structure was anything more mysterious than it was. She dared spray only a tiny amount onto her sleeve. After smelling it, she immediately replaced the cap for fear of wasting any. I told her that although perfume wasn't cheap on Earth, it could still be purchased. She didn't need to treat every drop as irreplaceable. She countered by asking why, if it wasn't unique. Both its bottle and its fragrance were finer than the tribute goods brought from Shanjing. I had no answer. The enormous difference between the two worlds' systems of value had revealed itself for the first time in one tiny glass bottle. If she liked these gifts, then our exchanges could continue. I drank a few sips of ginseng water, then set down the bowl once my body grew warm. Wuchan, I've brought you all these things, and I'd like to trade for something from you as well. She looked at me, then nodded. As long as I possess it, you may choose. My gaze settled on a fist-sized golden stone in the corner of the table. The golden stone had an irregular shape, with white, quartz-like veins mixed across its surface. I'd seen something similar in the news, a naturally formed gold nugget, though it wasn't pure. Its rarity and research value often made it worth more than ordinary gold of the same weight. I shone my phone's flashlight on it from several angles. The golden sections lacked the uniform reflection of plating, while the white minerals were naturally embedded in the crevices. I couldn't determine its gold content by sight, but at least it didn't resemble an artificially cast fake. The piece in front of me weighed more than 10 Gene. I lifted the nugget and studied it. Quartz and other minerals were embedded in the main body of gold, and there were no signs of artificial cutting. Generally, the more natural the shape and the larger the piece, the greater its value to a collector. A gold nugget weighing more than 10 Gene would have made the news on Earth, even if only half of it was actually gold. Its value couldn't be compared to a few bags of snacks. Can I have this? Wuchan Naga didn't care in the slightest. It is only a lump of mixed gold I picked up by the river in Spirit Tiger Valley. If you like it, take it. I accepted it with both hands, and its weight made my arms sink. To her, it was merely a decoration. To a museum or collector on Earth, it might be a centerpiece. I immediately asked about Spirit Tiger Valley. She said it wasn't especially far from the cabin. An ordinary person could reach it in roughly 2 days and 1 night on foot, and there should be more mixed gold along the riverbank. Why did you bring this one back? The color was pretty. So I put it on the table as a paperweight. That answer left me speechless. She didn't even know what the nugget might buy in Qingfeng town. To her, it was nothing more than an unusually shaped stone from the river. I didn't hide the fact that people on Earth valued such gold highly. I told her it could be exchanged for more phones, food, and daily necessities. A fair exchange had to be based on both parties understanding the other's needs. I didn't want to profit solely by exploiting an information gap. When she heard it could buy large quantities of food, all she asked was whether I wanted more stones like it. I said I did, but they weren't worth risking our lives in Spirit Tiger territory. For the first time, she gave me a serious warning. The name Spirit Tiger Valley was no exaggeration. Truly intelligent beasts lived there. I wanted to go, but heavy snow was still falling outside. Without proper equipment, my stamina would never carry me that far. When the snow stops, you can lead the way, I said. Do you have any more banshui like the last one? A dozen or so. Wuchan Naga led me into the woodshed next door. More than a dozen enormous mountain ginseng roots lay piled haphazardly in one corner. Even the smallest weighed more than 8 liang, while the largest exceeded a Gene. Several had already dried on the surface, while others were still covered in soil. She dug up the roots mainly to boil water during her secluded cultivation, so she never sorted them by age or condition. I told her not to break the tendrils carelessly or pile freshly dug roots directly on damp ground. She couldn't understand why such details mattered. I had to explain that buyers on Earth judged value partly by condition. Between 2 roots of the same age, even one missing tendril could mean a major difference in price. I crouched on the floor and inspected them one by one. I wanted the largest, but worried that taking too much the first time would offend her. More practically, if more than a dozen gigantic old ginseng roots suddenly appeared on Earth, the market and regulators would inevitably investigate. Even my breathing slowed as I looked. On Earth, these roots would inspire fierce competition. Here, they had been tossed into a pile like firewood. I didn't dare take them all. Such a quantity would only attract suspicion and greed. Instead, I selected the largest and darkest root. Its tendrils were intact, and the main body had faintly grown into a human shape. Wuchan Naga glanced at it. It is about 300 years old. It is close to becoming a spirit. How can you tell? It ran and burrowed through the ground when I caught it. I sealed off several directions in advance before I could dig it up. She described the chase as if it were perfectly ordinary. First, she watched the trail it made beneath the snow. Then she used true qi to loosen the frozen earth, and seized its rhizome crown before it could burrow into a layer of stone. To me, a plant capable of sensing danger and choosing an escape route was already close to the legendary spirits of folklore. She told me that ordinary banshui merely absorbed the vital energy of the earth. After several hundred years of growth, a small number gradually developed spiritual awareness, allowing them to sense danger and flee through the soil. If they continued to grow, they might eventually awaken as true spirits. I stared at the ginseng in my palm, unable to speak. A 300-year-old root that could run through the earth could no longer be measured by any common sense from Earth. It might be worth even more than the gold nugget, or perhaps no one would dare believe it was real at all. I packed both treasures into my backpack. The gold nugget pulled the shoulder straps taut. I rewrapped the ancient ginseng in cloth so its rootlets wouldn't break on the way. before returning to Earth. I again confirmed with Wuchan Naga that she had truly given me both objects to do with as I pleased. She only reminded me not to forget our trip to Spirit Tiger Valley after the snow stopped. She also wanted more perfume and foods in different flavors. This time, I couldn't simply walk into a random pharmacy and ask for a price. If my identity or the object's origins were exposed, someone might follow the trail all the way to my secret. I needed a channel that understood authentication and had access to serious buyers. I returned to the apartment with the gold nugget and 300-year-old ginseng, but I didn't take them outside immediately. I tried weighing them on a household scale. Its capacity was limited, and the nugget nearly filled the entire platform. The ancient ginseng, tendrils and all, also far exceeded anything sold by an ordinary pharmacy. If either figure appeared on an online marketplace, inquiries would flood in at once. I abandoned the idea of posting a secondhand listing and closed every curtain. I searched for public sales of gold nuggets and wild ginseng from recent years. Collectors had bought small natural nuggets, but pieces weighing 10 jin were almost never publicly reported. Any wild ginseng claimed to be more than 100 years old attracted enormous controversy, and many so-called ginseng kings were eventually accused of being assembled from multiple roots. The more authentic my treasures were, the more important a complete chain of testing would become. I didn't send the photos to any online appraisal group. A group might give me a quick estimate, but I couldn't control who saved the images or demanded to know my location. If I let a reputable institution view locally stored videos first, I could test its expertise without immediately handing over the objects. Both treasures were far too conspicuous. The gold nugget weighed more than 10 jin, and the root was vastly larger than anything normally available. Carrying them from shop to shop for quotes would only place me squarely in other people's sights. I recorded high-resolution videos from every angle, then hid the objects and took only the videos to the city's Cultural Relics Institute. Before filming, I disabled location data and automatic backups. I kept the window and apartment layout out of frame. The videos showed nothing but a white tabletop, a ruler, and the objects themselves. Even if someone copied the files, the background wouldn't reveal where I lived. I placed a ruler and digital scale beside the objects for reference. I also recorded close-ups of the nugget's mineral patterns and the ginseng's rhizome crown, skin texture, and pearl-like nodules. Even if an expert couldn't reach a conclusion from the videos, they could at least decide whether the objects deserved an in-person examination. I kept every video on my phone. Nothing was uploaded to the cloud. The Cultural Relics Institute was a legitimate organization capable of issuing written appraisals. It was more trustworthy than some private shop on the street. At the entrance, an elderly guard didn't believe me when I said I wanted to authenticate a gold nugget and a wild ginseng root. You didn't bring the objects, so what do you expect anyone to appraise? He waved me toward an ordinary jewelry shop and said fake gold nugget videos were all over the internet. I didn't argue about authenticity. I merely asked whether I could meet the experts responsible for precious metals and medicinal herbs. The rarer an object was, the less likely I could pass the gate with nothing but a claim. Valuables like these can't simply be carried around. I want an expert to watch the videos first and decide whether you can appraise them. The old man was about to argue again when a middle-aged man in a Zhongshan suit spoke from nearby and asked to see my videos. I didn't want to hand my phone to a stranger. The middle-aged man volunteered to watch while standing in front of me without taking the device. Only then did I lower my guard slightly. The old guard told me that the man was Yang Kaiyuan, the Cultural Relics Institute's expert on gold, silver, jade, and jewelry. He also served as an appraisal consultant for Jiaoding Auction Company. After examining his business card, I handed him the phone. Yang Kaiyuan was casual at first. The instant the gold nugget appeared on the screen, his expression changed. He paused and enlarged the video repeatedly, then demanded to know where the actual object was. He asked the guard to bring him a magnifying glass, then realized the lens was useless through a phone screen. Every time the video moved to another mineral inclusion, he had me stop. He asked whether I'd used natural light and whether the scale had been calibrated. His earlier indifference had vanished completely. I turned the questions around and asked how he ruled out casting or gluing. He pointed to the natural cavities, the way the quartz was enclosed, and the weathered layer on the surface. He also admitted that a video couldn't reveal the internal structure. That uncertainty made him more credible than someone who blurted out an astronomical price. A real expert should understand the limits of his evidence, not simply tell a seller what he wanted to hear. He first studied its overall shape, then had me pause at several areas where the color differed. He asked whether it had ever been cut, smelted, or artificially bonded. I denied all three and said it remained exactly as it had been found. When I switched to the ancient ginseng, he quietly recited appraisal features a long rhizome with densely packed stem scars, tight skin with fine wrinkles, and pearl-like nodules on the rootlets. I didn't understand the terminology, but I could tell he wasn't a complete amateur. He also asked whether the root had been spliced together, stained with syrup, or carved by hand. I pulled up uninterrupted footage from every angle, including the original soil, so he could see there were no edits around the rootlets. A true conclusion still required the physical object. But the video was enough to prove that further examination was worthwhile. First, tell me whether you can authenticate these and issue certificates. We can, but we must see the actual objects. I swiped back to the video of the 300-year-old ginseng. Yang Kaiyuan's breathing visibly deepened. He muttered professional terms about the rhizome, wrinkles, and rootlets. Almost pressing his face to the screen, he asked how much the root weighed. And I only said I hadn't weighed it yet. Do you charge for appraisals? I asked. He seemed not to hear me and continued replaying the footage. I asked again whether the seller's information could be protected. Only then did he look up. He admitted that an auction house or institutional buyer would have to verify both the object and the seller's identity. But the information could be kept confidential from the public according to regulations. It wasn't a perfect answer, but that made it more credible than an unconditional promise. I took back my phone. After confirming once more that the institute could perform the appraisal, I turned and left. Today, I was only testing the waters. I would never hand over the objects without making proper preparations. Yang Kaiyuan immediately shouted after me, "Wait, young man, don't leave yet." 2 short videos had completely hooked a man with connections to both an official appraisal institution and a major auction house. From this point on, the initiative was mine. Yang Kaiyuan caught up with me and offered to send a car back with me to retrieve the objects immediately. He promised to complete the appraisal and valuation within 3 hours. The more enthusiastic he became, the more suspicious I grew. The guard had treated me like a scammer moments ago, yet this expert now wanted to follow me straight home. The change in attitude brought by his position and knowledge was too abrupt. I put my phone in my pocket, gave him neither my number nor any hint of the direction in which I lived. You can remain with the objects the entire time, and all testing will be performed inside the institute, he hurriedly explained. If they're authentic, we can buy them ourselves or introduce you to Jiaoding Auction House. The terms sounded legitimate, but he didn't even know my name and already wanted to follow me home. I had paid for misplaced trust before. I wasn't about to expose a room full of treasure to a stranger. I didn't know whether he was truly an expert, much less whether I should let someone I'd just met discover my apartment. A bus was about to leave the stop, so I boarded and left him behind. By the time he reached the platform, the doors had closed. He continued gesturing through the glass for me to leave my contact information. His persistence only confirmed that next time, I needed to verify his identity inside the office building first. Back at the apartment, I still wasn't sure whether to return to the Cultural Relics Institute. If I did, I would enter the offices, confirm everyone's identity, and only then decide whether to bring the real objects. I searched Yang Kaiyuan's public records online. His photo and title matched, and I found several major gold artifact appraisals in which he participated. There was nothing wrong with the institute itself. The risk lay in convincing them the objects were real without allowing anyone to trace their origins to another world. A call from Chun Ling temporarily interrupted my plans. She invited Chung Hao and me out for drinks at an open-air food stall. Only after I arrived did I learn that she divided the family property that very day. At her stepmother's urging, Chun Ling's father planned to leave the distillery to her younger brother. Chun Ling confronted him directly and ultimately received 100,000 yuan in the family's liquor shop in the farmer's market. She placed her bank card and the shop keys on the table and said that starting tomorrow, the books, purchasing, and rent would all be her responsibility. 100,000 yuan sounded substantial, but compared with the distillery and everything her family had accumulated over the years, it was only a small fraction. She didn't cry. She simply drank one cup after another. Her voice remained calm as she told us, but her fingers never stopped gripping the cup. Most of the value in the distilling techniques and workshop had gone to her brother. All she received was one retail shop. If I keep fighting, we'll only turn our family into enemies. She poured herself another drink. With the store, I can at least support myself. Chung Hao was indignant on her behalf and asked why she hadn't fought for the workshop. Chun Ling shook her head. Their father had already made his choice. What mattered now was making the most of what belonged to her. The liquor shop can keep me fed. That's enough, she said. Then she took 20,000 yuan from her bag and handed half to each of us. You're both having a harder time than I am. Use this to get by for now and pay me back later. I looked at the 10,000 yuan and didn't accept it right away. Only hours earlier, I held a ginseng king potentially worth tens of millions. Yet I still had no idea whether I could sell it safely. Chunling assumed I was embarrassed and pushed the money directly into my hand. Cheng Hao accepted his share as well. His father's factory had failed to pay wages for several months, and this money could solve many immediate problems. In the end, I put the money in my pocket. Once I completed a sale, I would repay this trust many times over. 10,000 yuan would let me continue purchasing supplies, pay the rent, and avoid asking my mother for money. Chen Ling had no idea what was hidden in my backpack, yet she still shared her money during one of the hardest moments in her own life. That told me more clearly whom I could trust than any appraisal certificate ever could. We had grown up together. Excessive politeness would only create distance between us. I accepted the money but engraved the kindness in my heart. Once the gold nugget was sold, she would be the first person I repaid. Cheng Hao's family still hadn't found a buyer for the lumber mill. His father owed back wages, and the factory had no orders. His situation was just as difficult. We had only just reached that point in the conversation when a familiar woman's voice came from beside us. Su-yi, you just keep sinking lower and lower. Now you even need a woman to pay your living expenses. I turned and saw Luna. She had one arm looped through that of a bald man wearing a gold chain, and she was looking down her nose at us. Luna deliberately said living expenses, loudly enough for several nearby tables to turn toward us. The bald man beside her wore a thick gold chain, and two other men were seated behind him. She clearly hadn't wandered past by chance. She had seen us and deliberately come over. In the past, her words might have humiliated me. Now I only resented her for interrupting an important night for my friend. I remained seated and told her not to disturb us. She mistook my silence for guilt and continued mocking my unemployment, my move out of my mother's home, and the fact that Chen Ling was helping me. This time, she wasn't only hurting me. She was attacking a friend who had just suffered through the division of her family. I had no desire to revisit the past, but she had walked up to our table specifically to humiliate my friends and me. Chen Ling told her not to be so cruel. Luna immediately threatened to have the man beside her teach us a lesson. I placed one hand on the beer bottle at the edge of the table and stood. This meal was supposed to celebrate Chen Ling's independence. Luna clearly intended to turn it into a fight. If you want to fight, come and get one. I smashed the beer bottle against the corner of the table, keeping the jagged edge pointed at the ground. But you'll be responsible for the consequences. I didn't point the broken bottle at anyone. I merely stood in front of the table. The sound of shattering glass instantly silenced the nearby diners, and an employee began walking toward us. The bald man looked at the three of us, then saw that several people had already raised their phones to record. He immediately decided not to let the conflict escalate. The bald man grabbed Luna at once and forced a smile, calling it a misunderstanding. He was more clear-headed than she was and had no intention of risking his life over a few harsh words with strangers. He backed away while trying to persuade Luna to leave, but she clutched his arm, called him a coward, and continued provoking us. ID already lowered the broken bottle. All they had to do was turn around, and the confrontation would end. But Luna kept cursing us. Cheng Hao was already full of rage over the lumber mill. Suddenly, he snatched up another bottle and charged. Smash. The bottle struck the bald man's head, and he dropped on the spot. Blood ran from the man's temple. Cheng Hao froze, staring at the half bottle left in his hand. Chen Ling immediately forced his arm down, while I kicked the broken glass away so the fallen man wouldn't cut himself. He was still conscious, but the wound was bleeding. I asked an employee to press a clean towel against it and told the gathering crowd not to push any closer. The surrounding customers rose from their seats, and someone prepared to call the police. I told Cheng Hao to leave first, not because I wanted him to escape responsibility, but because I didn't want him to lose control and hurt someone else. Go now, I shouted at Cheng Hao. Only then did he realize how much trouble he'd caused. He turned and ran from the food stall. I made no further move. I only told Luna, if you hadn't kept provoking everyone, there wouldn't have been blood tonight. Don't bother us again. Luna first helped the bald man, then screamed abuse at me. I reminded her to call an ambulance and left my contact information with the restaurant. Cheng Hao would have to answer for striking the man, but the cause of the conflict and the witnesses at the scene also had to be preserved. Chen Ling and I stepped away from the table. She worried that Cheng Hao would be arrested. I also knew the situation would be difficult to resolve if the other party called the police. At that moment, Yang Kaiyuan's voice came from behind me. "Young man, I've finally found you." An elderly man wearing glasses stood beside him. He introduced himself as Chun Zhongxing, director of the Cultural Relics Institute. He confirmed that Yang Kaiyuan was indeed the institute's chief expert in gold and silver artifacts, then invited me back to discuss a partnership. Chun Zhongxing Henti involved himself in the argument. He approached only after the danger had passed. He accurately described several features of the gold nugget in my video and new details of the ancient ginseng S-root system, proving that Yang Kaiyuan had given him a complete report, rather than immediately asking where the real objects were. Chun Zhongxing first handed me his identification and business card. He said Yang Kaiyuan had reported the features shown in the videos and that the institute believed the two objects might have considerable research and collection value. That was why they had searched for me late into the night. As for how they found me at the food stall, Yang Kaiyuan only said they used the limited clues from my visit to the entrance and asked around the nearby area. The explanation still made me uncomfortable, but it also proved how seriously they wanted the objects. I agreed to go with them so I could verify their identities. Inside the Institute's office building, I found both men's names and titles on the wall of leadership photographs. Our previous encounter truly had been a misunderstanding. The elderly guard looked extremely embarrassed when he saw us enter together. Yang Kaiyuan ignored him and took me directly to the elevator. The photographs, the names on the office doors, and the way employees addressed both men all corroborated one another. Only then did I finally stop suspecting that they were scammers. In the office on the top floor, Chun Zhongxing watched the gold nugget video, followed by the ancient ginseng video. He repeatedly paused and enlarged the footage. Even the hand adjusting his glasses trembled slightly. The walls displayed numerous appraisal credentials, while sealed samples and catalogs of past work filled the cabinets. I photographed the names of the institutions and checked them one by one on official websites. Only after confirming that this wasn't an elaborate temporary setup did I sit across from them to discuss the objects. More than 10 minutes later, I asked, "If the real objects are authentic, will the institute buy them?" Chun Zhongxing didn't answer at once. First, he asked whether the nugget remained in its original condition and whether the ginseng had been washed or dried. I explained that neither object had been processed and that a little of the original soil still clung to the root. He warned me not to wash it again or leave the rootlets exposed to dry air for long, as either could affect the appraisal and its value. Chun Zhongxing's eyes suddenly seemed to shine. "You're willing to sell them. Why else would I have come for an appraisal?" He immediately said he was willing to negotiate, but then asked where the two objects had come from. I stood. When something is valuable, don't ask where it came from. If you insist on investigating, our cooperation ends here. That was my bottom line. They could know that I was the seller, but not where I lived. They could never know that another world existed. Chun Zhongxing immediately withdrew the question. I also stated my terms clearly. "My name is Su Yi. You can think of me as a middleman. I provide the goods, you provide the money, and we each get what we need. But both the objects and the transactions must remain confidential. I made no promise that I could supply similar objects in the future, and I wouldn't allow them to investigate any supposed upstream seller. All communication had to go through me. Without my consent, they couldn't disclose my phone number or address to the media, other institutions, or potential buyers. If the Cultural Relics Institute needed to show information to an auction house, it could use only redacted reports and partial photographs at first. Buyers could view the complete materials only after paying a deposit and agreeing to the confidentiality terms. Anyone who demanded direct access to my supplier would immediately end our cooperation. I could remain vague about my supply capacity, but my boundaries had to be explicit. I would accept normal contracts under my real name, anti-money laundering checks, and all tax requirements. Confidentiality wasn't about evading the law. It was about preventing irrelevant people from learning about my power and stockpile. Confusing the two would only create greater risks for my real secret. Any materials shown to buyers could identify the objects only by number. If my identity had to be verified, that information would be confined to the contract and legally required procedures, interviews, promotional photographs, and dramatic stories about the object's origins were all out of the question. I was selling goods, not turning myself into a news story. Chun Zhongxing didn't write down the terms, but he immediately asked his secretary to leave the office and promised that only essential personnel would participate in the appraisal. Both Chun Zhongxing and Yang Kaiyuan agreed. From the videos, they could only make preliminary judgments. To issue authoritative certificates, they needed to inspect the physical objects and take approximately 2 grams from the gold nugget and a tiny section of ginseng rootlet for instrumental testing. The process was reasonable, so I agreed. I specifically confirmed both the sampling locations and quantities. The gold sample had to come from an inconspicuous edge, while only the very tip of the finest ginseng rootlet could be cut. The entire process had to be recorded, every sample numbered, and any unused portion returned to me in person. 2 grams was negligible compared with a nugget weighing more than 10 gene. But even a tiny cut might affect the Ginseng King's condition. I required them to photograph the objects before sampling and archive a close-up of the exact place they cut. Once the reports were complete, all remaining sample material had to be returned with the main objects. Nothing could disappear into an unknown channel. Both experts accepted. The procedure was cumbersome, but it would prevent future disputes over authenticity or damage. Then I asked for their valuation. Chen Zhongxing told me that a gold nugget weighing around 10 gene might sell for between 2.8 and 3.5 million yuan. If the ancient ginseng's weight, age, and condition matched the video, it might qualify as a Ginseng King, with an estimated value of at least 20 to 30 million yuan, perhaps even more. The gold nugget's price depended mainly on its gold content, natural shape, mineral composition, and collector demand. The ginseng was more complicated. Its age, weight, species, preservation, and actual medicinal potency could all change the price. These were only estimates from the videos. No promises could be made until physical testing was complete. Those numbers were enough to make any ordinary person lose his composure. But I personally experienced the effect of the ginseng broth. And I knew this root could already flee through the earth. The experts on earth could only judge it as ordinary wild ginseng. They had no idea what power it actually contained. The gold nugget could be sold. I had to be far more cautious with the Ginseng King. 3 million yuan was enough to solve every financial problem I currently faced. But the Ginseng King could transform a person's constitution and perhaps even save a life. If I sold the only one, I had merely to increase the number in my bank account. No amount of money could buy it back when I truly needed it. I originally planned to retrieve the objects the next day, but it was already 10:30 at night, and Chen Zhongxing still insisted on appraising them immediately. He asked Yang Kaiyuan to assemble the testing staff and personally drove me to the area near my apartment. I asked why it couldn't wait until morning. Chen Zhongxing answered frankly if the videos were genuine. Both objects were valuable enough to inspire fierce competition among his peers. He didn't want me taking them to another institution, and he feared I'd change my mind after going home. His honesty actually reassured me. At least his urgency came from self-interest rather than some hidden plan. I didn't let him come upstairs. 5 minutes later, I packed the gold nugget and ancient ginseng into my backpack and returned to the car. The tension finally left Chen Zhongxing's face when he saw me. I deliberately came down another staircase and didn't let the vehicle stop in front of my building. The backpack looked ordinary, yet the 2 objects inside might be worth tens of millions. At every intersection, I watched for anyone following us. He offered to carry the bag, but I refused immediately. The nugget was heavy enough for the straps to bite painfully into my shoulders, yet I insisted on carrying it to the car myself. Before getting in, I photographed the sealed backpack and the license plate. I also scheduled a message to Chen Ling if I failed to cancel it within several hours. She would receive the name of the Cultural Relics Institute and Chen Zhongxing's information. This was the first time I'd carried priceless treasures into a transaction with an institution. There was no such thing as being too careful. I also temporarily shared my phone's location with her, saying only that I was negotiating a transaction involving valuable objects. She replied with a question mark, but I didn't explain. If something happened, at least someone would know where I'd last gone. During the drive, Chen Zhongxing made one call after another to confirm the equipment and personnel. I sat in the back with my eyes closed, trying to rest, but my heartbeat kept accelerating. If the appraisal succeeded, the gold nugget would become the first real fortune of my life. And if the ancient ginseng proved to be far beyond an ordinary root, I could no longer treat it as a normal auction item. The money was almost in my hands. The truly difficult question was how to protect a secret worth far more than money. Half an hour later, the gold nugget and ancient ginseng were placed in separate examination trays. Cameras recorded the entire process. Yang Kaiyuan handled the nugget, while Chen Zhongxing examined the ginseng. Both men wore gloves, studied the objects through magnifying lenses, and measured every dimension and weight. The staff first photographed my backpack and both objects and documented the handover time. They placed the nugget on an industrial scale because it exceeded the capacity of an ordinary household model. For the ginseng, they measured the length of the main root, its rhizome crown, the rootlets, and its total fresh weight. Everyone signed the transfer record. An acid-free cushion covered the table, and a humidity gauge sat beside the ginseng. I confirmed that the red recording light was on before allowing them to unwrap the final layer of cloth. I remained beside the table the entire time and never let either object leave my sight. I understood none of their technical vocabulary. All I knew was that they examined everything with excruciating slowness. Yang Kaiyuan studied the surface luster, hardness, and natural inclusions to determine whether the nugget had been cast. He also examined the mineral colors under light from several angles. Chen Zhongxing explained the ginseng's skin wrinkles, stem scars, date pit-shaped nodes, and pearl-like root nodules section by section. The longer he looked, the gentler his movements became, as if even his breath might damage the rootlets. After the preliminary observation, Yang Kaiyuan removed 2 rice grain-sized samples from the nugget's edge. Chen Zhongxing clipped a tiny section from the tip of one rootlet and handed it to a staff member for instrumental testing. At last, the 2 men gave me their initial conclusions. The gold nugget had formed naturally, and its gold content was provisionally estimated at 70 to 80%. What made it extraordinary wasn't only its size. It might contain more than 100 trace minerals, giving it considerable research value. Yang Kaiyuan said several faint colors appeared across the nugget's surface. Unlike ordinary quartz impurities, if the instruments confirmed a complex mixture of rare elements, it wouldn't be merely a collector's piece. It could help researchers study the mineral environment of the region where it had formed. He pointed out several blue-gray and dark red particles, explaining that naturally associated elements created unique combinations. If the testing spectra confirmed his theory, the nugget wouldn't be valued only by its gold weight. Its complete shape and scientific importance would both raise its value to collectors. I didn't tell him that the region where it had formed wasn't on Earth at all. The ancient ginseng was even more astonishing. Chen Zhongxing judged it to be approximately 300 years old, but its actual medicinal potency might equal that of ordinary ginseng aged 500 or 600 years. A faint violet aura seemed to cling to its surface, matching descriptions of the violet dragon king ginseng. In ancient medical records, he asked me to come closer and smell it. Even after only a tiny tip had been clipped from a rootlet, the fragrance in the air had noticeably intensified. Ordinary ancient ginseng doesn't produce a persistent aroma like this, he said. I found similar descriptions only in a handful of old medical casebooks. He brought out a set of facsimile medical texts and pointed to brief records describing violet skin patterns, an unusual fragrance, and a powerful ability to replenish blood and vital energy. The passages were short, and a book alone couldn't prove the root's identity. But at least they showed that he hadn't invented the name Violet Dragon King Ginseng on the spot to deceive me. For the first time, I realized that what Wuchan Naga casually called Bangshui might once have appeared in Earth's ancient records. This kind of ginseng was mentioned in only a handful of documents from antiquity, so both objects are extremely valuable, I asked. Only then did the experts stop debating. Chen Zhongxing still wanted to know where they had come from, but I refused again. He didn't press the issue. Instead, he offered to have the Cultural Relics Institute buy the gold nugget. As for the Ginseng King, their budget could never cover it. The institute was a public institution. Purchasing a signature exhibit required a budget and formal approval. Special funds might cover the nugget, but a medicinal herb worth tens of millions fell far outside their usual collection. Chen Zhongxing admitted that even if he could obtain approval, he didn't want a life-saving Ginseng King lying uselessly in a display case. I asked whether it could be auctioned. He warned me that although a public auction might drive up the price, it would also encourage buyers and other interested parties to investigate the seller. That was precisely what I feared most. He then proposed a solution: the Cultural Relics Institute could act as my agent and consign it to auction. Every external procedure would go through them. Only he and Yang Kaiyuan would know the identity of the true seller. The institute would handle the certificate, promotional materials, buyer communications, and auction house formalities. I would appear in the contract only as a protected consignor. The object itself would be publicized, but not my history or the details of its origin. Buyer bids, deposits, and settlement would all pass through formal institutional channels. I would never meet a bidder privately. If anyone asked about their supplier, the institute would cite its confidentiality agreement with the consignor. The arrangement wasn't perfectly safe, but it would eliminate a great deal of direct contact. It couldn't stop every investigation, but it would be far safer than standing at the auction myself. That way, I could pursue a high price while isolating myself from most scrutiny. The proposal seemed workable, but protection was never free. "What are your terms?" I asked. Chen Zhongxing asked for 5% of the final auction price. 2%, I countered immediately. He accepted with barely a moment's hesitation and held out his hand. Only then did I realize that even 2% was probably generous. Still, trading a commission for anonymity was worth it. I didn't rush to negotiate a price for the gold nugget. I made him place the test results on the table first. During the hours we spent waiting, I ordered spicy crawfish and beer. Once the bottles were open, Chen Zhongxing dropped his formal manner and ate and talked with me. I went from calling him Elder Chun to Old Man Chun. He complained that I had no respect, yet laughed louder than anyone when we clinked bottles, for all the lively conversation. I never revealed where the objects had come from. He took the hint and stopped pressing me. The test reports finally arrived before dawn. The gold nugget was 79% gold and contained several rare trace elements. Confirming Yang Kaiyuan's assessment, I first checked the report number and the photograph of the submitted sample, then confirmed that the remaining sample had been sealed and returned. I couldn't understand the dense list of elements on the spectrum, but the 79% gold content was clear enough. This wasn't a gold-plated fake, nor was it a story the Institute had invented to keep me there. The Ginseng King's report was even more outrageous. The instruments showed that its active compounds and life energy far exceeded those of ordinary ginseng, with concentrations nearly 1,000 times greater. After reading it, Chen Zhongxing repeated only one sentence: "This is a true ginseng king." The Institute and I continued negotiating the gold nugget and ultimately settled on a price of 3.5 million yuan. We signed the contract at 9 in the morning. 1 hour later, the full 3.5 million yuan reached my account. The contract clearly stated the nugget's complete weight, current condition, test results, and one-time purchase price. The Institute would assume responsibility for its future preservation and research. I would bear no further risk from changes in market value. Before signing, I photographed every page. I completed the handover only after confirming that the payment had arrived. When the bank message appeared, I still logged into mobile banking and checked my available balance instead of trusting the notification. The complete 3.5 million yuan was there, with no mysterious processing fee or unfamiliar link asking me to pay taxes first. Only then did I sign the Institute's receipt confirmation. Chen Zhongxing laughed at my excessive caution. I reminded him that last night we'd been complete strangers, and today our transaction already exceeded what most ordinary people earned in many years. Trust could be built, but it could never replace proper procedure. Instead of taking offense, he carefully returned my copy of the contract to its document envelope. I stared at the balance for a long time. Yesterday, I agonized over spending a few dozen yuan on a taxi. Now I was a millionaire. The Institute still wanted to handle the Ginseng King's auction. I refused, since its effects couldn't be valued by normal standards. Rushing to sell it might be the stupidest possible choice. Chen Zhongxing followed me all the way to the door, saying open bidding might push the price to 30 million yuan. I told him that a video valuation and the root's true medicinal effects were completely different things. I could find another gold nugget after selling this one. But if I sold the Ginseng King, I currently had nothing that could replace it. I left with the root and hid it in my apartment again. Then I went online and ordered a tent, ice axes, a camp stove, sleeping bags, a mountaineering pack, a multi-purpose knife, canteens, shovels, trekking poles, snow boots, and finally a snowmobile. Payment confirmations flashed across the screen one after another. In the past, I compared prices at 3 stores before buying one pair of shoes. Now I could order a snowmobile costing more than 8,000 yuan without hesitation. But I didn't lose control and start wasting money. The snowy mountains of the other world weren't an amusement park. If one missing piece of survival gear killed me, another zero in my bank account would be useless. Spirit Tiger Valley was 2 days from the cabin. Ordinary hiking equipment would barely keep me alive, while a snowmobile could shorten the journey dramatically and carry more supplies and gold nuggets. I reorganized the checklist into 5 categories: warmth, shelter, fire, navigation, and first aid. I also bought extra rope, headlamps, spare batteries, and sealed bags. My phone had no signal in the other world, and map applications were useless. I couldn't rely on any device that needed an internet connection. I unpacked and tested every piece of equipment. The stove lit properly, the headlamp ran continuously, the sleeping bag zipper didn't jam, and the first aid medicine hadn't expired. For the snowmobile, I also bought repair tools, spark plugs, and a tow rope. The machine could save us a full day of travel. But if it broke halfway there, it might strand us in an even more dangerous place. That evening, I invited Chung Hao and Chun Ling to karaoke. I wanted to repay the money and share some of my happiness with them. Before I could leave, however, my mother called and asked me to come home for dinner first. She said my aunt missed me. I thought about all the times Zhang Yali had given me money and suddenly realized that showing off shouldn't be the first thing I did after receiving this fortune. I went to a cosmetics store and a jewelry shop. 2 cosmetic sets they normally couldn't bear to buy, and 2 fine jade bangles cost only a tiny fraction of my balance. Yet I was more nervous at the register than I had been signing a 3.5 million yuan contract. Money in a bank account was only a number. It acquired real weight for the first time when it became gifts in their hands. The first money I earned would go to my family. When I arrived home, my aunt was waiting on the couch. The moment she saw me, she took 1,000 yuan from her purse. She told me to be careful while living on my own and not to be too stingy when spending time with friends. I assumed she called me home to demand repayment of the 3,000 yuan and had spent the journey rehearsing an explanation. When she held out that stack of cash, I realized she'd been worried that I wouldn't eat properly after moving out or would feel inadequate around my friends. The excitement of my new fortune was instantly buried beneath guilt. My nose stung, and I refused the money. Auntie, I've already made some money. To protect my secret, I only said I'd done a little business with a classmate. Then I gave the 2 cosmetic sets and jade bangles to her and my mother. My mother's first reaction wasn't happiness. She asked whether I'd broken the law. Her concern wasn't unreasonable. Only a few days ago, I'd been an unemployed graduate living off my parents. Now I was suddenly giving away gifts worth tens of thousands of yuan. Anyone would have been suspicious. I repeatedly assured her that the money was legal. My aunt spoke up for me as well, and only then did my mother reluctantly relax. When they asked the price of the bangles, I had to lie and claim they'd been free gifts with the cosmetics. My aunt clearly recognized that the jade wasn't cheap, but she didn't expose me in front of my mother. My mother held her bangle beneath the light and examined it several times, remarking that it was very pretty for a free gift. My aunt lightly tapped hers with a fingernail and gave me a sidelong look. I hurried to carry dishes and serve soup, so she couldn't continue appraising it. By helping me hide the truth, she was also warning me not to display wealth so abruptly next time. My mother wanted to know which classmate I was doing business with and what we sold. At just the right moment, my aunt pulled the jade bangle from its bag and changed the subject for me. She made a face at me, and sweat immediately broke out across my forehead. Hiding things from my family felt terrible. But if either the crossing or the ginseng king became known, they might be dragged into danger. During dinner, I told them I would travel out of town with a classmate for business over the next week. In reality, I was preparing to take my equipment into the other world and travel to Spirit Tiger Valley. My mother served noodles with soybean paste and pork bone soup. I complained that she'd promised me a feast and given me nothing but noodles. She immediately raised a hand as if reaching for the feather duster, and I buried my face in the bowl. The familiar taste grounded the unreal feeling that had followed my sudden wealth, no matter how much money sat in my account. At this table, I was still the son my mother could chase around the house and scold. After eating, I voluntarily carried the dishes into the kitchen and gave them more specific dates for the week-long trip. My mother packed several changes of clothes. While my aunt reminded me to check in every day, I agreed to everything. Though I knew my phone wouldn't receive any of their messages once I entered Mount Lu. Later, I reached the karaoke lounge. Chun Ling and Chung Hao arrived one after the other, though Chung Hao remained depressed all evening. He told me that the real reason no one would buy the lumber mill was its lack of high-quality logs. Ordinary plantation would have margins that were too thin, while premium timber was becoming harder and harder to source. His father lost his temper every day as a result. Chun Ling's liquor shop could only support a basic living. She refused to dilute the liquor with water, so the quality remained high, but her profit was extremely limited. Chung Hao called over 2 hostesses to sing with us. Chun Ling immediately warned him that they were there only to sing and that he wasn't allowed to corrupt me. The private room became lively again, but the phrases, no timber and low profit remained in my mind. What my friends truly needed wasn't the money for one night of drinking. They needed a sustainable path forward. I transferred the 10,000 yuan back to Chun Ling. When the payment notification appeared, she froze, then asked what kind of business I was doing. I only said my first deal had been settled and gave no amount. Chung Hao pressed me as well, So I pushed the microphone into his hand and told him to finish his song before asking. That was enough to let the subject pass. I also reimbursed Chung Hao for the miscellaneous expenses he'd covered earlier and asked both of them to keep their transfer records. Friendship could govern favors, but money was best settled promptly. Once my purchases grew in scale, vague advances and reimbursements would be the easiest way to create misunderstandings. They saw that I didn't want to reveal more and stopped asking. They only told me to call if I ever needed help moving goods or finding a business connection. Their ability to stop despite their curiosity earned more of my trust than any sweeping promise that they would absolutely keep my secret. I didn't promise them anything yet. The 3.5 million yuan could help temporarily, but it couldn't save a lumber mill without raw material or change the business model of a small liquor shop. The other world, however, had endless primeval forests and mountain ginseng capable of transforming a human body. If I could establish a stable and safe channel for trading goods, the Chung family lumber mill and Chunling's liquor shop might both become my partners. For now, I kept the idea to myself until I verified the timber quality, my carrying limits, and the trading rules of the other world. Saying anything would be an empty promise. The greater the secret, the more dangerous it would be to pull others in on a burst of excitement. At noon the next day, a delivery call woke me. The snowmobile and all my outdoor equipment had arrived. I checked each item against the order and separated the climbing tools, fuel, and first aid supplies. Finally, I tried lifting the mountaineering pack once it was fully loaded. Its weight yanked my shoulders down. Fortunately, I didn't need to carry it far to cross. I only had to bring everything through at the fixed arrival point. From there, the snowmobile could handle the transportation. My preparations for Spirit Tiger Valley were complete. After the delivery truck unloaded the snowmobile and equipment, I bought nearly 100 liters of gasoline and divided it between the vehicle's tank and spare fuel cans. I temporarily pushed the snowmobile into an empty room on the first floor, then packed the tent, sleeping bags, stove, medicine, and tools into a large backpack. The gasoline fumes were powerful. I repeatedly checked every seal on the fuel cans and separated them from metal tools that might create friction. My crossing ability might let me escape danger, but it couldn't prevent a stupid fuel leak from starting a fire. The snowmobile itself obviously wouldn't fit in a backpack. On my first attempt, I placed one hand on the handlebar and gripped the equipment with the other. Once I focused my thoughts, the entire vehicle and everything in contact with me crossed the barrier. My carrying limit was broader than I'd expected, but direct physical contact was still necessary. Before leaving, I bought 2 servings of rice with braised pork feet and a whole roast goose, then crossed to the cabin with the food and equipment. Wuchan Naga smiled more openly than before when she saw me. The instant she noticed the snowmobile, however, her caution returned. She circled the strange machine and studied it for a long time. I asked whether she'd missed me over the past 2 days. Her face immediately reddened. Instead of answering, she urged me to explain our plans outside. I stopped teasing her. The fact that she allowed me to enter this cabin again and again was already the clearest sign of trust. The snow should stop tomorrow, she told me. That would be our chance to depart. I asked her to draw the route on the ground. We would follow the ridge north, then circle around 2 river valleys. A shallow cave along the way could serve as an overnight shelter. She estimated that walking would take 2 days and 1 night. If the snowmobile maintained its speed, we could cover most of the distance before dark. I drank 3 sips of ginseng water first, then set the food on the table. Once Wuchan Naga tasted the roast goose, she barely paused. The rice and pork feet disappeared just as quickly. She looked at the empty containers, a little embarrassed. I did not expect it to smell and taste so wonderful. I brought it for you. Her stomach remained perfectly flat, yet I just watched a whole roast goose and 1 complete meal vanish in front of her. A rank 7 martial artist's appetite clearly couldn't be measured by ordinary standards. As I ate my own serving, I made a mental note from now on. I needed to bring at least 3 people's worth of food. After the meal, I filled the snowmobile with 50 liters of gasoline and secured the spare cans to the rear. I drove several practice laps outside the cabin. It moved smoothly over the deep snow, and the controls were similar to those of an electric scooter. The first time the engine roared, her sword left its scabbard. I hurriedly switched it off, let her touch the track and fuel tank, then restarted it. When she saw that no animal was pulling the vehicle, she circled it in search of the supposed power formation. In the end, she could only accept that it burned the gasoline I'd brought. I had her sit behind me and drove 1 slow lap around the cabin. When I accelerated for the first time, she instinctively used her lightness skill to counter the force and nearly launched herself off the back. I explained that she shouldn't fight the vehicle's momentum. She only needed to hold on and lean into the turns. She learned quickly and could soon stand and draw her bow even while we were moving. We also established hand signals: tap my left shoulder to turn left, tap my right shoulder to turn right, and tap twice in rapid succession to stop immediately. The engine was loud, and we might not hear shouted warnings when beasts attacked. Practicing simple signals before departure was far safer than trying to guess each other's meaning on the road. With this machine, we could shorten a journey of 2 days and 1 night dramatically. Wuchan Naga couldn't take her eyes off it. She had already accepted that I could appear from nowhere, yet machines from Earth could still amaze her. Then I took a pair of 30-power binoculars from my backpack. The binoculars had cost me more than 2,000 yuan and included range-finding and night vision functions. In the past, I would never have spent so much on a single trip. But in an unfamiliar snowy mountain range, detecting danger early might be the same as gaining another life. The cabin stood halfway up the mountain. Once I adjusted the focus, trees and animals thousands of meters away seemed to leap in front of my eyes. Many creatures in the snow-covered forest didn't exist on Earth, and most were unusually large. Wuchan Naga moved 2 steps closer. "What are you looking at?" I handed her the binoculars and showed her how to focus them. She looked through them once and immediately pulled them away to check the distance with her naked eyes. Then she raised them again. After comparing the views several times, she finally understood what they did. She slowly shifted the focus from the nearby treetops to the depths of the snowy forest, and even her breathing softened. A beast crouching behind a tree several thousand meters away was so clear through the lenses that she could see its ears twitch. Her cultivation let her see farther than I could, but even she couldn't match that level of detail. Is this the immortal artifact that gives an ordinary person clairvoyant eyes? They're only binoculars. I laughed. "I'll give them to you after this expedition." I taught her to adjust the distance between the eyepieces first, use the central wheel to focus, and switch to low-light mode at night. Once she learned, she surveyed our planned route and spotted 3 large beasts migrating in the distance. On foot, we might not have detected them until we were close. The binoculars had proven their value before we even departed. She also noticed the markings on the tubes and asked whether they could measure distance. I demonstrated the rangefinder according to the manual, though I admitted I wasn't yet proficient. Her estimate based on experience in the mountains was actually more accurate. Modern equipment couldn't automatically replace experience. It became truly reliable only when combined with her judgment. Wuchan Naga immediately shook her head. She clearly believed that something capable of bringing a view from thousands of meters away before one's eyes was worth far more than a few meals. But to me, the truly valuable gift was her willingness to guide me into Spirit Tiger Valley. There were spirit beasts, gold, and ancient ginseng roots that could flee underground. I could give away the binoculars, and I could buy another snowmobile if this one broke. What I would never have again was the first opportunity to explore the depths of this world. Wuchan Naga refused to accept the binoculars because she considered the gift too valuable. "If it makes you uncomfortable, give me the remaining bonchue in the woodshed," she agreed immediately. To her, the ancient ginseng roots were ordinary herbs for nourishing blood and vital energy. Once my body became strong, their effect would gradually diminish. I didn't hide my purpose. I want to use them only for myself. "I'll also trade them for supplies on Earth." Wuchan Naga nodded. At last, she understood our dealings as an exchange rather than one-sided rewards from an immortal. I didn't want to exploit her mistaken belief that I was some immortal. Binoculars were merely consumer goods on Earth, while ancient ginseng could save a life. There was no single standard by which the two sides could measure value. By speaking openly, at least I wouldn't have to pretend that everything I accepted from her was a casual gift. She also explained the limits of what she could trade. She had the authority to give away food and medicine from the cabin, but not the property of the Wuchan family's merchant houses or the communal goods of Feisher village. That boundary reassured me. A real partnership shouldn't be built on her saying, "If the immortal wants it, he may take it." I promised to tell her how difficult Earth goods were to obtain. While she would help me judge prices in this world once we entered the towns, we didn't have to convert everything into the same currency. But neither of us would deliberately hide the information the other cared about most. The sky soon darkened. Since I intended to depart early the next morning, I asked to spend the night in the cabin. She offered me the bed and said she would meditate. I suggested that we each sleep on one side, only to learn an unexpected local custom: only married couples could share a bed. If a woman slept beside a man and he later refused to marry her, her reputation would be ruined. The matter might even be settled by a duel. She said the custom couldn't be dismissed as mere gossip. A family would treat sharing a bed as confirmation of a relationship. If the man denied it, the woman's father or brothers had the right to challenge him. The Wuchan family was the foremost clan in Qingfeng town. If word reached them, the consequences would be even more serious than for an ordinary household. I remembered that we'd already awakened in the same bed during my first crossing. Wuchan Naga wanted to pretend the accident had never happened, but I told her that if we returned to Qingfeng town together 2 months from now, spending so much time together without a reasonable explanation of our relationship could create just as much trouble for her. I grew nervous as soon as the words left my mouth. She was a gifted swordswoman, came from a powerful family, and believed I was a visitor from the upper realm. If I exploited that misunderstanding to obtain her agreement, it would be no different from deceiving her. So I told her the truth about my situation on Earth. I had no job, my girlfriend had just left me, and only days earlier I'd needed to borrow money from my aunt. I also explained that marriages on Earth usually began with 2 people spending time together, followed by a decision about meeting each other as parents. A single accident didn't bind them for life. Once she understood, she asked whether I would leave if we were still incompatible 2 months from now. I didn't make an empty promise. I only said that when the time came, we would speak face to face and make our choice clear. I don't dislike you. If you feel the same way, we can seriously consider marriage. She lowered her head and remained silent for a long time. She worried that she was only a mortal and unworthy of the visitor from the upper realm she believed me to be. Once again, I explained that I was an ordinary person on Earth, even weaker than most martial artists here. In the end, she didn't refuse. She only said we would discuss it again after 2 months. Her answer wasn't a promise, but neither was it a rejection. We'd known each other for less than a few days. Talking about marriage so soon was absurdly fast, yet with the customs of 2 worlds pressing down on us, leaving everything vague might cause even more harm. At least our relationship had moved 1 step forward. That night, I slept in the bed while she meditated on a cushion beside it. Near dawn, I awoke to find the morning light falling across her and took a photograph with my phone. The wind battered the wooden shutters through the night. I woke several times, and she always maintained the same posture. Only when she changed her breathing would the firelight around her tremble gently. It was the first time I'd watched someone cultivate through an entire night at such close range, and the first time I understood that her strength wasn't an effortless gift she could squander. Even beneath 3 layers of fox pelts, the cold still woke me. She sat beside the brazier in nothing but her white gown, her body remaining warm throughout the night. At intervals, she rose to add wood and check the gaps around the window before returning to meditation. Offering me the bed hadn't been mere courtesy. She truly could rely on her cultivation to withstand an entire freezing night. Before dawn, I saved her photograph to an offline album and disabled cloud synchronization. If I lost the phone, no stranger should see a person or cabin from another world, no matter how much I liked the picture. I couldn't forget that it was also evidence capable of exposing the location. Wuchan Naga opened her eyes. "What are you looking at?" I held out the photograph. She stared at the image of herself, too astonished to speak. I explained that no person had been trapped inside the phone. It had simply painted her appearance at that instant. She quietly asked why she looked more beautiful in the picture than in real life. "The picture isn't as beautiful as you are." A smile touched her face. Then I showed her the camera view. She tried pointing the phone at me, but the image shook with every movement of her wrist. When the shutter sounded, half my face had been cut out of the frame. She looked at the failed photograph and laughed aloud for the first time. I didn't delete it. Instead, I saved it beside her portrait in the morning light. The storm outside had weakened. In another 2 hours, we could formally set out for Spirit Tiger Valley. Before departing, I prepared instant noodles and ham sausages, then gave Wuchan Naga a new toothbrush and toothpaste. I demonstrated with my own toothbrush, squeezing out only a pea-sized amount and warning her not to swallow the foam. When she tasted the mint, she nearly swallowed the toothpaste like candy. Then she frowned at the mouthful of foam. Once she rinsed, however, she loved the clean, refreshing sensation and carefully stored the toothbrush in a wooden box. She normally cleaned her teeth with a horsehair brush dipped in coarse salt. The cooling sensation and foam fascinated her the first time she used toothpaste. What was merely a repetitive daily task to people on Earth could improve someone's life here. After breakfast, we climbed onto the snowmobile. Wuchan Naga sat behind me and gave directions. At full speed, the vehicle traveled far faster than she'd expected anyone to move on foot. Large beasts repeatedly chased us along the route, and several even attacked. She shot them all from a distance with her bow. She wasn't accustomed to the engine's vibration and initially gripped only the rear of the vehicle. During my first sharp turn, her body tilted and her palm immediately landed on my shoulder. Later, when the terrain grew steep, she simply used a short strap to secure us both to the seat so neither of us could be thrown off during combat. Every shot she fired was steady. The moment her bowstring sounded, the closest pursuing beast tumbled into the snow. I focused on the path ahead. Once I heard an arrow slice through the air behind me, I no longer looked back. The snowmobile pressed a long trench through the drifts, and the engine alerted herds even farther away. Speed saved time. But it also made us the most conspicuous target in the forest once we entered the deeper woods. Ancient trees so wide that 10 people couldn't encircle them appeared everywhere. No nation or clan controlled this place. Intelligent beasts claimed their own territories. Claw marks scarred tree trunks and boulders along the way. Some higher than my head, Wuchan Naga identified the rulers of each territory from dung, scent, and broken branches. She preferred a long detour to crossing a fresh trail. No matter how fast the snowmobile was, it couldn't replace her knowledge of the wilderness. Wuchan Naga told me that Spirit Tiger Valley belonged to a pride of spirit tigers. Only after crossing that valley would we truly enter the depths of Mount Lu. How dangerous is it? Even I would not enter lightly. Only martial artists of rank 8 or above risked going inside to cultivate. I took the opportunity to ask about the ranks of martial artists in this world. Martial artists were divided into ranks 1 through 9, and each rank had lower, middle, and upper stages. Above rank 9 came grandmasters, who had already surpassed the limits of an ordinary human. Beyond them were the legendary land immortals. She said rank 1 marked the beginning of sensing and using chi. After rank 3, the body became far stronger than an ordinary person as. Only at rank 6 or higher could someone truly use force to soar and skim through the air. A rank 7 expert could dominate an entire region around Qingfeng town. Yet, even a rank 9 martial artist was no grandmaster. Crossing any major threshold required far more than medicine. Cultivation methods, insight, blood and vital energy, and real combat experience were all indispensable. Forcing one's progress with tonics could damage the meridians instead. Wuchan Naga had practiced the sword since childhood. Yet she was only at the upper stage of rank 7. My accidental entry into rank 1 had merely allowed me to skip the initial threshold. It didn't replicate the years of effort she had accumulated. I asked whether modern weapons could defeat high-ranked martial artists. She had never seen guns or artillery and couldn't answer. We could only test that question in the future. Until then, I wouldn't underestimate this world's power system merely because I had a stun baton and snowmobile. I arranged the hierarchy in my mind. Rank 1 was merely the beginning. At rank 7, Wuchan Naga could skim across snow and cut beasts apart with a sword. Beyond rank 9 lay an even harder threshold. The martial arts legends of Earth and what existed here were almost entirely different concepts. Only 2 people in all recorded history had reached the realm of land immortal. Even living grandmasters were extremely rare, with only 2 or 3 in each nation. Wuchan Naga was currently at the upper stage of rank 7. She detrained since childhood and possessed extraordinary talent, yet still saw no hope of breaking through to grandmaster, unless I encounter some extraordinary opportunity capable of remaking my foundation. She said. Her voice was calm, but I could hear how narrow that path was. A nation had only 2 or 3 grandmasters. While only 2 land immortals had ever existed, in Qingfeng town, she might already be a rare expert. In the depths of Mount Lu, she still had to proceed with caution. I was about to ask more when a fiery red shadow suddenly shot from the trees. It was nearly the size of a tiger, but resembled an enormous leopard. It moved so fast that only a blur remained. I wrenched the handlebars aside, and the snowmobile nearly rolled. Wuchan Naga shouted from behind me, "Fire leopard, don't let it get close." By the time I heard her warning, the red shadow had already circled the tree ahead. The engine didn't frighten it. Instead, it accelerated close to the snow, clearly treating our fast-moving vehicle as prey. Wuchan Naga drew her bow from the rear seat, but the bouncing vehicle sent her first arrow past its shoulder. Wuchan Naga's first arrow missed. The fire leopard changed direction repeatedly across the snow. After evading the arrow, it lunged directly at the driver's seat. It could tell I was weaker and ignored Wuchan Naga completely. Its claws were already in front of my face. I twisted the handlebars, and the track skidded sideways across the snow, but the fire leopard contorted in midair, its claws still sweeping toward my face. In that instant, I didn't even have time to focus enough to cross worlds. All I could smell was a powerful, bloody stench. Sword light flashed. The fire leopard's body stopped in midair, and its head fell into the snow first. Wuchan Naga had ended the fight with a single strike. At the final instant, Shi Di stood on the rear seat, braced one foot against the frame, and swung. My eyes caught only a black line before the leopard passed over the vehicle and fell in two pieces. If she'd been half a beat slower, its claws would have torn open my face. I steadied my breathing and asked whether the beast was edible. She told me that fire leopard meat was tough, gamey, and worthless as food. She flicked the blood from her blade as casually as if she cut through a branch. It took me far longer to regain a steady grip on the handlebars. A clever fire leopard that hadn't even awakened true intelligence could already identify the weaker target. The real spirit beasts of Spirit Tiger Valley would only be more dangerous. We continued. Half an hour later, I stopped and shared a Red Bull and compressed biscuits with her. Then I spotted a flock of enormous, pure white birds among the snow-covered brush. I checked the fuel and tie-down straps first, making sure my sharp turn hadn't loosened the spare cans. Wuchan Naga dragged the leopard's carcass away from our tracks so the scent of blood wouldn't attract more predators. Even during the short break, we took turns watching our surroundings. Neither of us treated this forest like a safe road. The birds were snow chickens. They were nearly as large as turkeys on Earth, lived on plant roots and leaves, and had timid dispositions. Their meat was tough but edible and could replenish a large amount of blood and vital energy. Wuchan Naga said an ordinary pot needed an entire day and night to stew the meat tender. I had a pressure cooker. At my request, she shot one of the snow chickens. I tied it behind the snowmobile and decided it would be our dinner. The birds were almost impossible to distinguish against the snow. When they remained still, they looked like drifts. Wuchan Naga's arrow pierced one through the neck. When she carried it back, it was as large as an earth turkey. I tested its weight. We had dinner, and there would still be enough meat to take back to the apartment and refrigerate. The farther we traveled, the taller and harder the trees became. A faint woody fragrance permeated the air. I asked whether anyone owned them. I scraped away a little of the surface with my multi-purpose knife. The blade met far more resistance than it would cutting ordinary pine. The exposed grain was dense, the color warm, and a clean fragrance emerged the moment I cut it. Even without understanding timber, I could tell it was nothing like wood from a fast-growing plantation. I took a small sample from several species, sealed each one immediately in a numbered bag, and photographed the leaves and entire tree. If I brought Chung Hao only blocks of wood, he might not be able to identify the species. Photographs of the original environment would at least let him match the appearance, grain, and growth pattern. I avoided rare saplings and removed only a small corner from the lower trunk of common mature trees. I never cut a ring around the bark, even if the other world's forests seemed endless. No one manages it. Couldn't mean I was free to destroy it without restraint. No one governs Mount Lu, and no one comes here specifically to log. Wuchan Naga explained. People in Qingfeng town mostly build with cloudstone, and the trees nearby are enough for furniture. Who would risk entering the mountains and then find a way to carry the logs out? In the other world, these ancient trees were so abundant that no one cared about them. On Earth, the Chung family's lumber mill was on the verge of collapse because it lacked quality raw material. I ran a hand over the trunk beside me. The wood resembled pine, but was heavier and denser, with a stronger fragrance. If I could transport it to the apartment in batches and have the Chung family's factory process it, perhaps we could create a new business. But I still had to test the maximum size I could carry, whether the wood met Earth's standards, and how I would explain its origin. Felling a tree that 10 people couldn't encircle would require heavy equipment. Cutting it into pieces I could transport would also destroy some of its value as a complete log. More importantly, even if the forest appeared unclaimed, it might lie within a spirit beast's territory. I reduced the business idea to collecting samples for now. I wouldn't let fantasies of wealth distract me from this scouting expedition. I didn't start dreaming of instant riches. I scraped away only one small piece of bark and recorded the scent and grain. Felling, sectioning, and transporting the wood would each be far more complicated than carrying away a ginseng root. Then there were Earth's quarantine and provenance requirements. A single gap in the story could expose my secret. For now, Spirit Tiger Valley remained our priority. Wuchan Naga had told me that its river contained gold nuggets, and its nearby forests held ancient ginseng roots capable of fleeing through the earth. Near dusk, Wuchan Naga suddenly told me to stop. She leaped to the crown of a tree more than 30 meters high and surveyed the distance with the binoculars. A moment later, She dropped back to the ground and pointed toward the hollow ahead. On her way up, her feet touched only a few branches before her white figure vanished among the leaves. I stood beside the snowmobile, staring upward, and didn't dare relax until she descended. 30 meters was the height of a 10-story building to me. To her, it was merely an observation point for finding a campsite. A shallow cave there had served as her camp during previous journeys into the mountains. Its entrance stood more than 2 meters above the ground. Keeping out most beasts, Wuchan Naga carried me and the equipment up to the entrance in several trips, then went to gather dry firewood. I set up the tent and 2 sleeping bags and boiled water. The cave extended less than 10 meters into the rock, but the floor was dry. A stone stool and old charcoal ash remained in one corner. She had often stayed here on previous trips. Since the entrance stood more than 2 meters above the snow, large beasts couldn't easily leap straight inside, and a fire would deter creatures afraid of light. I used a headlamp to inspect the crevices and ceiling. After confirming there were no snakes, insects, or fresh claw marks, I brought the equipment inside piece by piece. Wuchan Naga could leap directly into the cave. I could only rely on her to lift me up. As expedition partners, our difference in mobility made me little more than baggage she had to carry. Once I pitched the tent, she crawled inside and looked around curiously. A layer of fabric so thin it could block the wind and create an enclosed sleeping space seemed far more ingenious to her than a stone bed in a cave. To prepare the snow chicken, I took the carcass back to my apartment. I plucked it, cut it into pieces, and blanched the meat. Then I placed a portion in a pressure cooker with ginger, pepper, cooking wine, and a package of mild tonic soup herbs before taking the entire pot back to the cave. I sealed the remaining meat in storage bags and put it in the refrigerator. While cleaning the kitchen, I worried the landlord might suddenly enter. A white bird that large would be hard to explain. Only after washing away the blood and feathers did I return to the cave with the still warm pressure cooker in my arms. The cooker emitted a continuous whistle as it came under pressure. Wuchan Naga watched it with her sword in hand for a long time and relaxed only after deciding it wouldn't explode. After nightfall, I played a gentle piano piece on my phone. The music echoed from the stone walls. Beasts occasionally growled outside, while inside there was only the crackle of the flames and the quiet melody. Never had the two worlds felt as close as they did in that moment. Wuchan Naga asked how many people had to strike the instrument to create that sound. I found a picture of a piano and told her that only one person played it, with strings and felt hammers producing the notes. She couldn't understand the complicated mechanism, but the peaceful melody was clear enough. She leaned against the cave wall and closed her eyes to rest. I kept the volume low so the sound wouldn't carry too far. Modern music could relax a campsite, but it might also attract beasts from the mountains. After every song, we paused and listened outside to make sure no new footsteps or growls were approaching. 2 hours later, I opened the pressure cooker. The snow chicken meat hadn't fallen apart, but it was tender enough to eat. The soup carried a faint ginseng fragrance, and the other ingredients had completely removed the original gaminess. I waited until the pressure had fully released before turning the lid. Wuchan Naga remained off to one side, prepared for the steaming iron pot to explode without warning. When the lid lifted and white vapor burst out carrying the aroma of meat, her sword finally returned to its scabbard. Wuchan Naga took one sip and immediately concluded that the snow chicken had eaten ginseng, making the blood and vital energy in its body unusually abundant. She told me to drink no more than half a bowl at first, but the flavor tempted me into eating several more pieces of meat. The fibers remained firmer than ordinary chicken, yet when I bit through them, they carried a faint ginseng sweetness. At first, my body merely felt warm. I mistakenly assumed that several previous doses of ginseng water had made me tolerant. I never expected the medicinal strength to continue accumulating afterward. She ate most of the pot alone without the slightest reaction. A rank 7 martial artist could draw blood and vital energy directly into the body's circulation. The difference between our constitutions had never been clearer than when we ate from the same pot. A tonic suited to the strong wasn't necessarily a blessing to the weak. She asked what I'd added. I listed the ginger, pepper, salt, red dates, goji berries, lotus seeds, and several mild tonic soup ingredients one by one. Most were unfamiliar to her, and in the end she categorized them all as spices from the upper realm. I didn't correct her. I only reminded her there was plenty left in the pot, and that she could have more whenever she wanted. I drank a bowl as well. The chicken soup was extraordinarily flavorful, and heat soon spread from my stomach through my entire body. At first, it felt pleasant. After several minutes, however, I grew hotter and hotter. I remembered my reaction the first time ID drunk ginseng broth. Back then, ID only suffered a nosebleed and expelled filth from my body. The force I had absorbed this time was clearly much stronger. I set down the bowl. My skin had already begun to turn red. Wuchan Naga had been quietly drinking her soup, but she soon noticed my breathing grow heavy. I tried to tell her I was fine, yet my tongue felt pinned down by the heat. My pulse accelerated with every beat, and the roar of blood filled my ears. Snow chicken meat was already a powerful tonic, and this one contained medicinal strength from the ginseng it had consumed. For my current constitution, the bowl might not be nourishment. It might be a violent medicine capable of destroying me from within. The heat didn't subside. It continued gathering inside me. My temperature rose rapidly, and foul-smelling black grime began seeping from my skin once again. It felt as though an enormous force were trying to split my body open from the inside. Once the heat surged through my entire body, even breathing became difficult. I tried to cross back to Earth for help, but my mind couldn't focus. The firelight split into overlapping images, and all I could hear was my racing heart. Wuchan Naga told me to sit cross-legged, but I couldn't even bend my knees steadily. She had to seize my shoulder and force me down. Wuchan Naga realized something was wrong and immediately moved behind me, pressing one palm against the crown of my head. Do not resist. Remember the path along which I guide your blood and vital energy. A steadier force entered my body and drew the rampaging heat into my meridians. Following her guidance, I concentrated and circulated my blood and vital energy along a complex route. The path descended from the crown of my head, circled my chest and abdomen, then branched into my limbs. Whenever my attention weakened, the heat began rampaging again. Her palm never moved. The chi flowing from it was like a rope dragging the scattered force back into place 1 inch at a time. With every completed circuit, the burning diminished slightly. The first time it reached my chest, the heat suddenly split in two, and I instinctively tried to avoid the pain. She immediately increased the pressure of her palm and forced the straying chi back into the meridian. The second circuit was smoother. Only after the third did the swelling pain beneath my skin, the feeling that I was about to burst, truly fade. Finally, all the heat converged in my abdomen. The force that had nearly torn my body apart compressed into a form of chi I could both sense and control. When I opened my eyes, Wuchan Naga was already meditating nearby to recover. A thick layer of black grime covered my body, and the stench was even worse than before, yet ID never felt lighter. Both my hearing and sight had become much clearer. I could hear the wind brushing across the snow outside, and the distant snap of a dry branch beneath an animal's feet. I could even follow the path of tiny ashes falling on the other side of the fire. The sudden amplification of my senses made it difficult to tell which sounds actually signaled danger. Wuchan Naga had me close my eyes and listen only to the nearest and farthest sounds, then distinguish the layers in between. She said a martial artist's senses improved upon entering the ranks, but without matching control, all the noise would become a burden. A martial artist didn't merely grow stronger. He also had to learn to control every new ability. I followed her instructions and regulated my breathing. My heartbeat gradually receded into the background, allowing me to separate the footsteps outside from the wind. The small animal that had broken the branch wasn't approaching, and nothing was wrong with the fire. For the first time, I stood watch using the senses of a rank 1 martial artist rather than depending on her to tell me we were safe. I returned to the apartment, washed myself, and crossed back to the cave. Dawn was already lightening the horizon. The black grime peeled away in sheets beneath the hot water, filling the bathroom with a disgusting odor. I washed 3 times before I was clean. My skin in the mirror hadn't grown much fairer, but my muscles were more defined, and the fatigue left by years of staying up late had vanished completely. After Wuchan Naga finished regulating her breath and examined me, she said, "You have entered rank 1. I've never practiced martial arts. You drank ginseng water repeatedly and consumed a snow chicken containing immense blood and vital energy. I circulated your chi through a complete circuit, cleansed your body and marrow, and helped your body produce chi that you can control." She emphasized that my breakthrough hadn't given me cultivation from nothing. It resulted from the medicinal energy, the snow chicken's blood and vitality, and her cultivation method working together. If I continued eating powerful tonics without circulating them properly, the force would still run out of control. Next time, there might not be anyone close enough to save me. She divided the most basic chi circulation formula into short phrases and made me repeat each one. I could remember the route. but still made mistakes with my breathing, focus, and speed. She ordered me to complete 3 circuits every morning and evening. If I felt stabbing pain, tightness in my chest, or any loss of control, I had to stop immediately. I was forbidden to force a breakthrough merely to chase a higher rank. I wrote the formula in symbols only I could understand and omitted her clan's name. Cultivation methods might be subject to rules of inheritance in this world. I had no right to take hers to Earth and make it public without permission. Her willingness to save my life didn't turn her teachings into another commodity I could sell. She asked me to try the path we just used. I closed my eyes and quickly sensed the faint energy within my meridians. When I focused, it truly moved according to my intent. I guided it into my arm, and my 5 fingers instantly became stronger. With a light push from one foot, my body moved much farther forward than I'd expected. Compared with Wuchan Naga's power when she killed the fire leopard, the change was insignificant. Compared with the man I'd been yesterday, however, it was a complete remaking. This was more than simply becoming physically stronger. I had touched the threshold of this world's martial path. Wuchan Naga reminded me that I had to continue replenishing my blood and vital energy and circulate my chi regularly to stabilize rank 1. With continued cultivation, I might even advance. I repeated the route in my mind until I was certain I wouldn't forget. Crossing had opened the door to 2 worlds. The ginseng water and snow chicken had pushed me onto the martial path. Opportunities were coming too quickly. That made it even more important not to leave my life to luck. I clenched my fist. My strength, reflexes, and bodily control were all noticeably different. Before, I could only rely on Wuchan Naga to protect me from every beast. Now, at last, I had a place from which to begin growing. But we were already approaching Spirit Tiger Valley. The creatures there weren't ordinary animals. They were intelligent spirit tigers capable of claiming and defending territory. At dawn, we packed the camp and continued towards Spirit Tiger Valley. The black grime from last night had been washed away, but the chi within my body remained perfectly clear. As I drove, I slowly circulated it along the route I memorized. Despite the snowmobile's constant jolting, my waist and back didn't ache as they had the previous day. Rank 1 was only the beginning, but I could already feel the difference in a martial artist's body. Wuchan Naga told me we would pass Facier village along the way. Only a dozen or so households of Kila hunters lived there, their families having inhabited Mount Lu for generations. They had ancient ginseng but lacked grain, so we could trade supplies with them. 2 hours later, more than 20 enormous log houses appeared in a hollow. The villagers emerged one after another. Most adult men stood close to 6.5 feet tall and were heavily muscled. Even the women were larger than ordinary people on Earth. Wuchan Naga explained that the Kila naturally possessed powerful physiques and lived by hunting. They weren't giants. The snowmobile's roar drew a number of raised bows. Wuchan Naga dismounted first and explained our purpose in their language. Only then did the taut bowstrings slowly relax. Several children hid behind the adults' legs, daring only to peek at me. I took out milk candies and shared them with the children. The rigid atmosphere soon eased. An old man with a walking stick came to meet us. He was the village chief and spoke a local dialect, so Wuchan Naga had to translate for me. Outsiders first had to worship the sacred stone at the altar. Only then could they stay in the village or ask a hunter to guide them to Spirit Tiger Valley. An enormous black stone the size of a house stood at the center of the altar. Honeycomb cavities from extreme heat pitted its surface, while exposed sections gleamed with the metallic luster of iron and nickel. With their permission, I touched it and immediately concluded that it was a meteorite. It had to weigh at least 1,000 tons. On Earth, a meteorite of this scale would have enormous research value. But it was also a sacred object the Kila had worshipped for generations. Any attempt to take it would destroy the entire village's trust in me. The stone's surface was cold and rough. Many cavities looked as though flames had melted them before they solidified in an instant. The exposed sections were far denser than ordinary rock, and their color resembled photographs of meteoric iron I'd seen. I had no tools and couldn't take a sample, so I could only memorize what I observed. I suppressed my greed, completed the ceremony, and drank the bitter, low-alcohol liquor they offered. The ritual wasn't complicated. I followed the chief around the sacred stone, pressed my palm to its smoothest face, then poured a bowl of liquor into the fire. Wuchan Naga explained that the Kila believed their ancestors had descended from the sky with the sacred stone. If an outsider didn't show respect first, he couldn't even drink the village's water. I didn't believe the ritual itself changed anything, but I respected what the stone meant to them. The liquor offered only a mild burn at first, followed by the bitterness of grass roots. I noticed that the rim of the pottery bowl was badly worn. The village had very few metal implements, and most clothing was sewn from animal hides. After receiving the milk candy, the children carefully saved even the wrappers. Packaging and refined salt were clearly among the things they rarely obtained. The chief then settled us in a log house used for receiving guests. I began reassessing the opportunity in front of me. The Keela needed grain, salt, and medicine, all of which Earth could supply in enormous quantities. They possessed animal hides, ancient ginseng, and other worldly minerals, all extraordinarily valuable on Earth. What each side lacked was precisely what the other had in abundance. Salt and staple foods found in every supermarket on Earth had to be obtained through long journeys by hunters in this snowbound village. The medicinal herbs and animal bones casually piled in the villagers' woodsheds might be worth tens of millions if taken to Earth. This wasn't one isolated trade. It was a commercial route that might last for years. But to establish it, I first had to earn the Keela tribe's trust. In my mind, I separated the goods I could provide from those I couldn't. Grain, clothing, and daily necessities could arrive in bulk. Medicine had to be controlled, and weapons required even greater caution. Nor could I empty the village of ancient ginseng and gold in one transaction. The villagers would receive one batch of supplies and then fall back into hardship. A stable trade required quantities, schedules, and rules both sides could accept. I also observed how the village divided its labor. Adults in their prime hunted, elders treated hides and repaired tools, while children gathered firewood and cared for small livestock. Trade couldn't drive everyone to dig ginseng and search for gold. If it did, hunting, fuel, and housing would all suffer by the next season. Ideally, gathering trade goods would fit into their existing way of life rather than high prices turning the entire village into miners. The same applied to timber. Fasher village could provide fallen wood and small samples. But shouldn't he clear the forest for me? Only a trade that improved life on both sides deserved to be called. Long term, a child suddenly began crying outside. A haggard woman hurried over behind the village chief. They hadn't come to discuss trade. The chief's son was dying. A little girl of 4 or 5 hid behind the woman. She was one of the children who had accepted my milk candy. Wuchan Naga's expression turned grave after she heard the chief's explanation. The chief's son, Shirgan, had lost his left arm to the bite of a mountain-armored beast while hunting. The creatures often ate carrion, leaving their teeth covered in filth. Once a wound began to rot, it was extremely difficult to treat. They had applied medicinal herbs for several days. Rather than healing, the wound continued leaking black and yellow fluid. The woman's eyes were badly swollen. She clearly hadn't slept for several nights. Her daughter didn't yet understand death. She only knew her father no longer held her. The little girl dropped to her knees and sobbed, begging us to save him. I followed them into Shirgan's log house. The stench of decay mixed with medicinal herbs struck me at once. His left arm was gone at the shoulder, and the rot had spread from the wound across half his body. He was burning with a persistent fever. After examining him, Wuchan Naga shook her head. Their usual herbs couldn't stop the decay, and Mount Lu had no rot-clearing grass capable of treating an injury like this. What I saw wasn't a mysterious curse. It was a severe infection. Shirgan had survived this long only because his physique was far stronger than an ordinary person's. If the dead tissue could be removed and the infection treated with medicine from Earth, he might still have a chance. I had Wuchan Naga translate every risk I might fail to save him. Debridement could cause further bleeding, and medicine from Earth might create an unknown reaction. The chief didn't immediately agree. First, he asked his daughter-in-law and Shirgan himself. Though the fever had reduced Shirgan's voice to a rasp, he gripped his daughter's hand with his right hand and clearly said he was willing to take the chance. I checked his temperature, breathing, and the edge of the wound, then used charcoal to mark the healthy skin beyond the rot. The necrosis was already close to his shoulder. If we delayed, it might spread into his chest. The gauze and povidone iodine in my first aid kit were enough only for a minor injury. I needed to return to Earth for complete supplies. Even on Earth, an injury like this belonged in a hospital, not in my hands. I only helped at my aunt's clinic and understood basic disinfection and medication. I was nowhere close to being a surgeon. But there was no hospital here and no one more qualified. If I refused to act, Shirgan would almost certainly die. If I tried, he still had a chance. Let me try, I said. I can't promise I'll succeed, but it's better than waiting for him to die. Once the chief and family agreed, I asked everyone to leave except Wuchan Naga and told the villagers to boil a large quantity of water. The first aid kit I carried wasn't enough. I crossed back to the apartment, hurried to my aunt's clinic, and waited until she temporarily left the consultation room. Then I took a scalpel, scissors, disinfectant, anesthetic, antibiotics, and 4 supplies from the dispensary. I couldn't let my aunt discover what I was doing, and I couldn't leave an obvious shortage. I took only the minimum quantities necessary to save a life. I heard people speaking in the clinic and hid in the dispensary for half a minute, confirming my aunt was seeing a patient in the front before I moved. For every drug I took, I checked the expiration date and instructions, then returned the remainder of the same batch to its original place. For tubing, needles, and dressings didn't occupy much space. The real difficulty was remembering every drug's name, dosage, and contraindications. Before returning to Facier Village, I bought a new thermometer, disposable gloves, and several bottles of saline from a convenience store. The cost was small, yet it made me realize for the first time that cross-world medical care couldn't depend forever on taking medicine in an emergency. If I wanted to help the village over the long term, I needed a legitimate purchasing channel on Earth and clear medication records. I photographed the instructions and saved them offline, then wrote down each dosage and administration time on paper. The log house had no reliable clock, so I set alarms on my phone and personally verified every dose when they rang. Antibiotic treatment had to run its full course. We couldn't stop merely because the fever broke, nor could we increase the dose at random out of fear that the infection might return. Wuchan Naga prepared clean cloth, hot water, and lighting. She knew nothing about pharmacology, but she could use true qi to stabilize Shirgan's blood and vital energy, and her hands wouldn't tremble through a long procedure. We could proceed because the methods of 2 worlds compensated for each other's weaknesses. I recorded the name, dosage, and administration time of every medicine on my phone. I also left money in an inconspicuous place inside the medicine cabinet. Taking the supplies without permission was still wrong, but I had no time to explain a patient from another world. Once the life or death crisis ended, I would replace everything I'd taken. Back in the log house, I arranged the instruments and medicine. The Keela gathered outside, while only the patient, Wuchan Naga, and I remained inside. Steam rose from the hot water. I asked her to boil every instrument that might touch the wound, then disinfect it again with alcohol. She'd never seen such a procedure, but followed every step exactly. She didn't let the confidence of a rank 7 expert intrude into a field she didn't understand. First, we'll wash away the old herbs and contamination. Then we have to remove every piece of dead tissue, I told Wuchan Naga. It will hurt, and we still have to clean it completely. Shirgan clenched his teeth. Do it. I want to live long enough to watch my daughter grow up. Once the wound had been cleaned and disinfected and a local anesthetic administered, Wuchan Naga picked up the scalpel. Years of swordsmanship had made her hand extraordinarily steady. She removed the dead tissue slice by slice, moving with greater precision than I could have managed myself. I first used the back of my own hand to demonstrate the boundaries, showing her which colors indicated tissue that had to be removed and what could still be preserved. When the blade went in, Shirgan's entire body tensed, and his remaining hand gouged deep marks into the edge of the wooden bed. The anesthetic could only reduce part of the pain. Yet he didn't struggle once from beginning to end. I judged the boundaries, cleaned the wound, applied medicine, and dressed it. Finally, I started in 4 with antibiotics. We had no idea whether the Keela physiology was exactly the same as that of people on Earth. All we could do was observe and adjust. Shirgan's pulse was stronger than an ordinary adult's, and his body was much larger. I didn't dare mechanically increase the dosage according to Earth standards. I began the first medication at a conservative dose and set the 4 drip very slowly. Every 15 minutes, I recorded his temperature and consciousness. Then I had Wuchan Naga ask whether he felt chest tightness, chills, itching, or any other reaction. No more black fluid seeped from the wound after the debridement, and the redness and swelling around it didn't immediately expand. Wuchan Naga secured him with clean cloth strips, so turning over couldn't tear the wound open. I told his family to give him only warm water and bland food. They were forbidden to use strong liquor to drive out the cold, or reapply the ashes from the original medicinal herbs. The 4 dripped slowly. I constantly checked his pulse, breathing, and skin, terrified that an allergic reaction or shock might develop. Wuchan Naga remained beside the bed. Whenever I reported a change, she examined his blood and vital energy using her own methods. For the first time, Medicine from Earth and the techniques of this world's martial artists were being forced to work together. No one knew what the result would be. Near the end of the first bag of fluid, Shurgan awoke from his stupor. Pain had drained the color from his face. I gave him pain medication and continued treating the infection. Several hours later, his high fever began to fall, and his mind cleared. Shurgan even struggled to sit up and asked for food. The medicine was working. I didn't let him move around. I gave him only a little warm water and thin rice porridge. A falling fever didn't mean the infection was under control. It could still return after the debridement. I told the family when I would change the dressing and administer the next 4, and again forbade them from placing any medicinal herbs over the wound. At last, the chief and Shurgan's wife and daughter released their fear. The little girl threw herself beside the bed and wept, while the chief bowed to me repeatedly. I couldn't understand his dialect, but I knew I had earned his trust. Wuchan Naga told me that aside from food, medicine was what the village lacked most. Ordinary wounds could be treated with herbs. A severe infection, however, was almost always left to fate. That evening, the hunting party returned to the village. The lead hunter blew a bone whistle, and the people who had remained behind immediately came out with wooden sleds and ropes. Game was divided according to household size and each hunter's contribution. But the families of injured or disabled hunters weren't forgotten. Shurgan had clearly been one of the hunting party's core members. Though he hadn't gone out this time, the others still delivered a share of giant antelope meat to his door first. I stood beyond the firelight and watched them process the game. Snow chickens were frozen whole. Burrowing pigs were butchered, while the hide and wing membranes of a flying python were removed separately. Nothing edible or useful for clothing and tools went to waste. Faysher village lacked food not because its people were lazy, but because winter on Mount Lu made survival extraordinarily costly. More than 20 hunters pulled several enormous wooden sleds. They carried over 100 snow chickens for burrowing pigs, 3 giant antelopes, and a flying python with fleshy wings. The sleds had no wheels. Thick wooden runners slid directly over the snow. Blood from the game had frozen along their edges, and the flying python's dangling head was nearly as large as a bucket. Every hunter bore fresh wounds. One still had a broken beast claw embedded in his shoulder. This wasn't an adventure or performance to them. It was how the entire village survived the winter. Every animal was far larger than its closest counterpart on Earth. The villagers cheered and raised torches while the children ran around the sleds. When the hunters learned Shurgan's fever had broken, they came to visit him one after another. He clearly commanded considerable respect in the village. Once they heard that I'd saved him with unfamiliar medicine, the way they looked at me changed as well. Several wounded hunters lined up outside the log house and asked me to examine old injuries. I didn't hand out medicine to everyone. Instead, I first cleaned redness, open cracks, and contamination and taught them to wash wounds with boiled water after it cooled. Without an accurate diagnosis, doing less was safer than casually prescribing the wrong treatment. I asked Shurfeng to choose the most literate person with the best memory and have that person maintain records. From now on, they would write down who was injured, when dressings were changed, and whether a fever developed. The village had no doctor, but at least it could preserve information instead of losing it through confused verbal reports. Before this, I had been only a mysterious outsider brought by Wuchan Naga. Now, I was a healer who might save their lives. I didn't accept that title. The drugs had come from my aunt's clinic, and most of the debridement relied on Wuchan Naga's steady hands. But the villagers didn't understand those distinctions. All they saw was a dying man opening his eyes again. The more they trusted me, the less I could pretend that my limited medical knowledge made me omnipotent. The old chief then invited me to a feast in the Hunter's Hall and promised to send the village's most experienced hunters to guide us into Spirit Tiger Valley. 30 or 40 hunters sat inside the Hunter's Hall. The chief seated Wuchan Naga and me beside him and publicly described how we had treated Shurgan. The hunters took turns offering toasts. I couldn't understand most of what they said and judged their goodwill only from the way they clapped my shoulder and raised their bowls. Each liquor bowl was larger than an ordinary rice bowl on Earth. I took only a sip each time. Yet my face still grew hot. Wuchan Naga blocked several toasts for me, so the hunters turned on her instead, and laughter soon filled the hall. Gila liquor was weak, bitter, and rough, but it contained a small amount of ancient ginseng. Every sip produced a faint warmth within my body. The chief first raised his bowl toward the sacred stone, then asked every hunter to drink to the recovery of Shurgan and Shurling. I didn't understand the Gila language, so Wuchan Naga translated the blessing sentence by sentence. It didn't proclaim me some miracle doctor. It merely thanked a stranger for being willing to act when the outcome was uncertain. That made me far more comfortable. The roasted meat at the feast carried few seasonings, only coarse salt and a spicy grass seed. It was firm and grew more flavorful the longer I chewed, entirely different from farmed meat on earth. I didn't hurry to flaunt my wealth. I only handed out a small bag of candy to the children. We hadn't agreed on large-scale trade yet. Distributing goods carelessly might make them believe I could provide an unlimited supply. During the feast, Shirgan's daughter, Shiryan, ran over asking for candy. Wuchan Naga had already learned to carry several milk candies and handed one to her before I could. Shiryan couldn't open the wrapper, so Wuchan Naga lowered her head and tore it for her. The woman who could behead a fire leopard with one swing of her sword now had a child tugging at the hem of her clothes, and her expression was unusually gentle. I suddenly understood why she returned here every year. As I watched the child leave, I noticed an enormous tiger skeleton beside the door of the hunter's hall. The complete skeleton was nearly the size of an elephant. The skull alone was terrifying. I asked Wuchan Naga whether it came from Spirit Tiger Valley. After confirming with the chief, she nodded. It belonged to a spirit tiger that had died many years ago. Hunters had found the skeleton by chance and brought it back to the hunter's hall. I moved closer. The bones hadn't decayed. Instead, their surface was dense and smooth like jade. A single rib was thicker than my arm. The villagers displayed it only as a testament to their hunters. No one had used it as medicine or calculated its monetary value. Tiger bone was already extraordinarily rare on Earth, let alone the bone of a spirit tiger from another world. Its medicinal and research value might rival that of the Violet Dragon King ginseng. I disabled the flash and photographed the skeleton's details. My ruler was too short, so I asked Shiryong to stand beside the skull for scale. The sutures, fangs, and vertebrae were all intact, and there were no signs of boiling or smoking. If I could trade for it and take it to Earth, I would first test its species and composition. I absolutely couldn't hear the words tiger bone and throw it straight into liquor. When the chief saw my interest, he explained that the skeleton was a trophy left by their ancestors and didn't belong to any individual. Moving it required the approval of everyone in the hunter's hall. That rule suited me perfectly. The more valuable an object held in common, the more important it was not to arrange a private deal with one hunter. The bones belonged to the entire village. I couldn't simply take them. I needed to discover what the Keela truly wanted and then propose an exchange. Before the feast ended, I remembered the Ginseng King on Earth. My phone had no signal in the other world. If Chun Zhongxing couldn't reach me, he would inevitably continue searching. The fragment of rootlet removed for testing had been enough to restore someone's energy. The entire Ginseng King could only be more astounding. Once word reached wealthy circles, the price might spiral out of control. Money would come, but trouble would follow close behind. That section of rootlet had already proven the medicinal power. As soon as wealthy people heard about it, someone would eventually investigate the true owner. I had to decide in advance whether I would sell the Ginseng King and who deserved to become its buyer. After we returned to our temporary lodging, the old chief came to find me again with Shiryan. Another hunter had developed a severe infection and needed immediate treatment. The injured hunter was a young woman named Shirling. A beast's claws had torn a deep gash across her abdomen. The wound was infected, and her fever wouldn't break. Wuchan Naga and I again cleaned, disinfected, and dressed the wound and administered antibiotics. When our supply ran short, I returned to the dispensary at my aunt's closed clinic for more. This time, I didn't simply take what I needed and leave. I placed cash on the counter with a note containing only the words, "Payment for medicine." It still didn't explain where the medicine had gone, but at least the clinic wouldn't suffer an actual loss. Back in the other world, I separated the remaining medicine into supplies for Shirgan and Shirling, so exhaustion couldn't make me confuse the two. Shirling's first words after waking were to ask whether the hunting party had returned safely. Only after Shirfeng told her about the harvest and the other hunters did she agree to close her eyes and rest. Keela hunters treated wounds as ordinary. I repeatedly emphasized that she couldn't get up until the fever subsided, much less return to the mountains simply because she could endure the pain. Her wound wasn't as deep as Shirgan's, but it lay closer to her internal organs. I confirmed there was no continuing abdominal swelling or major bleeding before I dared clean the superficial infection. Halfway through, the pain woke her, and one hand instinctively reached for the knife at her waist. Wuchan Naga pinned the hand down and spoke several words in the Keela language before she lay still again. Then I re-examined Shirgan. His fever had fallen once, but the infection wasn't fully controlled and required continued treatment. As I prepared to return to the other world, a string of missed call alerts reached my phone. My mother, Chung Hao, and Chun Ling had all tried to contact me. I called each of them and said I was safe and still out of town on business. My mother asked which city I was in. I vaguely claimed the signal was poor and that the project had changed locations unexpectedly. The lies kept multiplying. I needed to finish this journey as soon as possible. Chung Hao didn't press for details and only asked me to join him for a drink when I returned. Chun Ling reminded me not to forget my meals. Chen Zhongxing had also called many times. Along with an unfamiliar number, I ignored it. But when the same number called again, I finally answered. Hello? My name is Jin Mingwe. Director Chun gave me your number. She came straight to the point, saying she wanted to purchase the Ginseng King and hoped to meet me. Her voice was steady, but her tone was tightly controlled. I asked how she learned about the test results. She said only that Chen Zhongxing was willing to vouch for her and that she could arrange a meeting and payment immediately if that old fox was willing to hand out my private number. Zhen Mingyue clearly wielded considerable influence. I asked why she was in such a hurry. Zhen Mingyue told me her grandfather was critically ill. Chen Zhongxing had given the old man a tiny section of the rootlet left from testing, and the effect had been extraordinary. She had to find the entire Ginseng King. I asked who had administered the fragment and whether there were medical records and professional doctors involved. She gave me the name of Elder D and promised to provide the complete details when we met. At least she hadn't heard a rumor about the Ginseng King and decided to try her luck. She had seen the effect of a piece from the same root. The background on her end was quiet, yet she paused several times, as if suppressing tears. Her urgency didn't make me agree to a price, nor did I refuse outright. The Ginseng King belonged to me, but the person who needed it might be deteriorating by the hour. Once Shiling's condition stabilized, I needed to return to Earth and learn the truth as soon as possible. It also explained why Chen Zhongxing had been searching for me so relentlessly, but I was treating patients and planned to enter Spirit Tiger Valley the next day. There was no way I could return immediately for a negotiation. I'm sorry, but I don't have time right now. We'll talk once I've finished what I'm doing. I ended the call and carried the medicine back to Feisher Village. The phone lit up again almost immediately, so I set it to silent. An old man on Earth was waiting for Ginseng to save his life, while a hunter in the other world remained dangerously feverish. Neither had time. I held the Ginseng King and would eventually have to make a choice. But I wouldn't set a rushed price because someone pressured me over the phone. Shirgan and Shirling continued improving. The old chief appointed the siblings Shir Yong and Shir Feng as our guides. Both were experienced hunters and could speak the Bashu dialect commonly used in Qingfeng town. That night, I didn't sleep. I circulated my qi along the route Wuchan Naga had taught me. By dawn, the rank 1 qi in my body had become much more stable. With every complete circuit, my hands and feet grew a little warmer. The wind battered the log house all night, but I didn't feel noticeably tired. Wuchan Naga occasionally corrected the rhythm of my breathing. The rest of the time, she sat outside the patient's door and kept watch at the village entrance. Shir Yong and Shir Feng mounted animals resembling enormous ostriches. We started the snowmobile. The four of us rode into the morning light and formally set out towards Spirit Tiger Valley. Shir Yong and Shir Feng often traveled to Qingfeng town to sell game, hides, and ancient ginseng in exchange for salt, grain, clothing, and wound medicine. I proposed a long-term exchange. You won't have to risk such a long journey in the future. I can provide medicine, grain, salt, sugar, and clothing for the same local goods. I'll give you more supplies as well. First, I asked them to calculate how many days a round trip to Qingfeng town required and what dangers they encountered. The siblings explained that carrying goods slowed them down and that they had to avoid herds of beasts along the way. The grain they brought back was heavy, so they could rarely make the trip more than a few times a month. If I delivered supplies directly to Feisher Village, they could spend the saved time hunting and caring for the injured. But I also made it clear that the first transactions would be small-scale trials. I wouldn't ask them to seize property from other villages or accept anything of unknown origin. Gold, ancient ginseng, and animal hides all had to come from safe areas. No one was to enter Spirit Tiger territory merely to obtain more goods. The first thing the siblings asked about was the medicine that had treated Shirgan and Shirling to the Kila. Medicine capable of saving a life was more valuable than any food. I agreed that it could be traded, but it had to be administered by me or someone I had trained. They couldn't use it however they pleased. More antibiotics weren't always better. The wrong dose could also kill. I couldn't simply leave bottles of medicine in the village and call the transaction complete. For any long-term partnership, I needed to train at least one person to recognize injuries, disinfect wounds, and record times. They also needed to understand which medicines must never be combined when we rested along the route. I shared compressed biscuits and energy drinks. After tasting them, Yong and Feng offered to trade game for more. Wuchan Naga even gave the instant noodles her personal recommendation. Yong bit off half a compressed biscuit, and his skeptical expression changed immediately. Feng folded the wrapper neatly and tucked it inside her clothes. Reluctant to discard even the printed plastic, they asked how long the food could be stored. When I told them the shelf life, they turned and looked at each other. I was thinking about cheaper, filling, shelf-stable staples such as potatoes and sweet potatoes. Facier Village didn't need expensive snacks. A dependable supply of staple food was what could truly change their lives. I asked whether crops could grow on Mount Lu. Feng said spring and summer were short. The village had tried small quantities of tuber crops, but limited seed and knowledge made the harvest unreliable. If sweet potatoes could tolerate the climate, they might provide both food and seed for the next season. The idea required agricultural knowledge and testing. I couldn't promise anything yet. Before our rest ended, an enormous white fox with 9 tails appeared among the trees. Wuchan Naga immediately fired an arrow, but the 9-tailed fox twisted aside. Its entire body was snow white and quickly disappeared against the drifts. Wuchan Naga chased it a long way, but still couldn't catch it. 9 tails flashed between the trees like a white wave suddenly breaking across the snow. Wuchan Naga's second arrow only clipped away a few hairs. By the time we arrived, there wasn't even a complete footprint on the ground. Only the arrow remained, embedded at an angle in a tree trunk. The siblings told me that the pelts of multi-tailed foxes were extraordinarily precious, but the animals excelled at hiding, and hunters rarely caught one. We had just prepared to continue when Wuchan Naga abruptly signaled for everyone to remain silent. 30 meters away, a radish-like plant was racing close to the ground. Soil churned ahead of it, and it moved almost as fast as a running animal. Bongshui Yong shouted. All 3 immediately moved to surround it. Wuchan Naga split the frozen earth with her sword, then shattered the rising mound with a palm strike from a distance. The ancient ginseng tried to change direction, but she seized it from among the weeds. The root continued twisting violently before it left the soil. Its fine tendrils reached downward like legs. Searching for a place to land, Wuchan Naga gripped the rhizome crown so no rootlet could touch the ground, while Feng quickly pulled a cloth bag over it from below. The entire process took less than 10 breaths. But it resembled the capture of a clever animal far more than gathering a plant. I didn't seal the fresh ginseng completely inside a plastic bag for fear it would suffocate and spoil. Instead, I placed a waterproof layer around the coarse cloth. Wuchan Naga warned that the stronger an ancient root's medicinal potency, the more it attracted beasts for the rest of the journey. The bag had to remain in sight and could never be opened casually on bare soil. Yong and Feng blocked both sides with spears, while I could only stand beside the snowmobile and watch. Every time the thing changed direction underground, it raised a thin line through the soil. It moved at an absurd speed. Without 3 martial artists familiar with the mountains, I would have mistaken it for some burrowing beast even if I'd seen it. The complete root system writhed in the air, truly resembling a desperately struggling ginseng baby. Wuchan Naga placed it in the cloth bag and tossed it to me, approximately 300 years old. We were fortunate. I held the bag tightly. Just like that, a second Violet Dragon King ginseng had fallen into my hands. The bag jerked several times before gradually growing still. 300 years of medicinal age, with every rootlet intact on Earth. This would be another treasure impossible to price as ordinary ginseng. But I didn't immediately cross home to hide it, because the true spirit Tiger Valley was drawing closer ahead. The instant the ancient ginseng left the earth, it stopped struggling. I opened the bag to check. Its surface carried the same violet aura as the first root, and it was heavier and older. Wuchan Naga explained that ancient ginseng could flee underground only while touching soil. I immediately tightened the bag and continued onward. I added a waterproof layer around the cloth bag and secured it against the inside of the snowmobile. If it fell into the snow while we were moving and touched the soil beneath, we might not even see which direction it escaped. I photographed it with an identification number on my phone, but didn't leave it exposed while repeatedly arranging a ruler around it. The fresh rootlets remained alive, and too much exposure would damage their condition. After taking the photographs, I wrapped it immediately and tied the mouth of the bag with 2 separate knots. One knot was attached to the frame so that even if the outer bag slipped, the root couldn't fall directly into the dirt. Shi said a 300-year-old ginseng was rare even on Mount Lu. Most hunters could live their entire lives without seeing one capable of escaping. The fact that Faisher village piled 50 and 60-year-old roots carelessly in its woodsheds didn't mean ginseng kings grew everywhere. I quickly abandoned the illusion that I could become rich without effort. The closer we came to Spirit Tiger Valley, the more animals appeared. The valley contained both a lake and river. Its water and dense vegetation attracted enormous numbers of beasts, but its true rulers were a pride of spirit tigers. Shi said the spirit tigers had rarely appeared over the past 2 years, making the valley safer than before. He also explained that the tiger skeleton in the hunter's hall hadn't actually belonged to a spirit tiger. It came from an enormous tiger on the verge of spiritual awakening, which another Kila settlement, Hidden Mist Village, had killed with a trap. Only then did I realize I'd misunderstood what I'd heard in the hunter's hall. True spirit tigers possessed awakened intelligence and even knew how to avoid hunts and ambushes. The owner of that skeleton had merely stood at the threshold of awakening, yet killing it had still cost an entire village dearly. At least 9 similar villages existed on Mount Lu. Hidden Mist Village lay at the opposite end of Spirit Tiger Valley. A journey of 2 days and 1 night from Faisher Village. The villages intermarried, exchanged news, and sometimes quarreled over hunting grounds. Faisher Village and Hidden Mist Village had a decent relationship, but they didn't share all their stores. If I contacted other villages in the future, I first needed to inform the old chief. I couldn't let our new partnership be mistaken for an attempt to provoke competition. We followed the frozen river downstream. Wuchan Naga had found her gold nugget on the mudflat where the river met the lake. After hearing her description, the Sher siblings recognized it as what they called goldstone. Villagers had found quite a few pieces over the years and usually took them to Qingfeng town in exchange for iron tools and grain. I asked what a fist-sized goldstone normally bought. The answer shocked me with how low it was sometimes. Only a few iron implements and several bags of coarse grain. The purchasing merchant set the entire price. The villagers didn't know the purity and owned no scale, so they could bargain only by hefting the stone. I decided to provide fixed quantities of supplies based on size and test results in the future. At least they would understand what created the difference in price. When I offered to pay more for any they collected in the future, they immediately agreed to watch for them. They didn't understand gold content. They knew only that goldstone could be traded more easily than ordinary rock. In the past, a heavy nugget might have bought only a few bags of grain. I didn't intend to exploit the old prices. This trade route would remain stable only if the villagers received enough genuine benefit. Before long, a vast lake with no ice appeared ahead. White mist constantly rose from the surface, and the temperature around it was noticeably warmer than in the snowy forest. Wuchan Naga said Mist Lake never froze, no matter how cold the weather, which drew countless beasts to the area. We stopped the mounts and snowmobile upwind so the odors in the warm mist couldn't conceal animal trails. Footprints covered the muddy lakeshore, cattle hooves, tiger paws, and 3-toed prints that seemed to come from an enormous bird. Water still seeped around the edges of the newest tracks, proving that a large creature had passed only recently. I swept the binoculars across the water. Gaps occasionally opened in the white mist, revealing tall reeds and dark shapes floating in the distance. Wuchan Naga forbade me from approaching the shore. A place where animals from an entire snowy mountain came to drink was also the ideal location for ambushing prey. There was no ice on the water, yet snow remained piled along the shore. When the rising heat met the cold wind, the resulting mist completely concealed the center of the lake. Enormous dark shapes occasionally moved beneath the surface, far longer than any fish I'd ever seen. I instinctively slowed the snowmobile. Even the engine's roar suddenly seemed far too loud. The spirit tigers lived in the valley at the lake's opposite end. The area was considered forbidden, and almost no one who entered returned alive. Even Wuchan Naga, at the upper stage of rank 7, didn't dare approach. She pointed toward the mudflat ahead. That is where I found the goldstone. I started the snowmobile and was about to inspect the area when a tiger's roar suddenly came from the depths of the lake. The sound rolled across the water and tore apart a vast swath of mist. The handlebars vibrated beneath my hands, and the animal calls that had filled the surroundings vanished instantly. Shi mount flattened itself to the ground and refused to advance, no matter how he urged it. The spirit tiger hadn't even appeared. Yet the entire lakeshore had already submitted to its rule. Wuchan Naga leaped into a tall tree and studied Mist Lake through the binoculars. Moments later, she dropped rapidly to the ground. A spirit tiger is fighting a water bull. We must retreat. She described only the silhouettes she'd seen. The spirit tiger was a full size larger than an ordinary giant tiger, while the water bull resembled a moving hill. Each collision between them in the shallows threw mud from the bottom of the lake. If either beast emerged from the mist, it could catch us within minutes. I didn't hesitate over the mudflat that might contain gold. I could return for material possessions. I had only one life. Even after turning the throttle fully, I asked Wuchan Naga to keep watching behind us. The sure siblings spread out to either side so a charging spirit beast couldn't trap all four of us at once. Wuchan Naga spoke more quickly than usual. I didn't ask whether we could exploit the chaos. I turned the vehicle immediately. Shuyong's and Shifeng's mounts bolted almost simultaneously. They clearly understood the consequences of becoming entangled in a battle between spirit beasts better than I did. The siblings' faces had gone pale. I refused to take any risk and let everyone 10 li away before stopping on high ground to observe again. We were too far away to see the details of the battle. All we could make out were the enormous waves repeatedly rising from the lake. Every collision blasted open a patch of white mist. Occasionally, the water bull's back emerged like a moving boulder. The spirit tiger was much faster, appearing only as a golden afterimage. Even from 10 li away, the display of power made my grip tighten around the binoculars. I also studied the terrain. Mist Lake occupied the center of an enormous depression, with the meteorite and gold nuggets nearby. Perhaps it had some connection to an ancient impact or underground geothermal activity. But regardless of what minerals lay beneath the lake, we currently had no ability to mine them. I recorded continuous video of the lakeshore, river direction, and high ground so I could draw an offline map after returning to Earth. Whether the geothermal heat, meteorite, and gold deposits were truly related could be determined only by future samples and experts. None of my current theories could be treated as fact, much less used to send villagers into dangerous areas to dig. For now, the most practical plan was to have Facier Village's hunters collect loose nuggets from the riverbanks. I decided to camp on the high ground and wait for the two spirit beasts to finish their battle. Once the tent was pitched, I used ginseng water to prepare instant noodles and added ham sausage to every bowl. We placed the tent on the leeward slope. With the entrance facing away from Mist Lake, I parked the snowmobile facing our escape route so I wouldn't have to turn it around if we needed to flee. Wuchan Naga took the first watch. The sure siblings examined nearby tracks, and I boiled water and prepared food as quickly as possible. The instant the water boiled, the wind carried the smell of seasoning far across the snow. Shuyong and Shifeng had been taking turns watching the area, but both couldn't help looking back. For paper bowls lined up on the snow created an absurd contrast with the distant battlefield where spirit beasts churned the lake. The moment the aroma spread, the siblings crowded around the pot. After eating, they immediately offered to exchange all the meat, ancient ginseng, and small quantities of goldstone stored in their village for this long-lasting food. Wuchan Naga had become a devoted advocate for instant noodles. I explained that I could also bring cheaper and more filling staple foods. Instant noodles were useful for travel but unsuitable as a village's long-term diet. Potatoes, sweet potatoes, corn, and rice were more practical and less expensive if crops could grow in this soil. I might even bring seed and cultivation methods, turning an emergency trade into a stable food supply. Since we still had to wait, I sent the sure siblings to search for ancient ginseng nearby. 300-year-old roots capable of fleeing through the soil were rare. Most ranged from 50 or 60 years to 100. The Keela considered younger roots unimportant and often wouldn't bother digging them up. To me, they remained scarce medicinal herbs. I showed the siblings how to preserve the rhizome crown and rootlets and warned them not to yank the roots or compress different ages into one bag. Condition mattered greatly in appraisals on Earth, and the harvesting method determined whether the root sold for its proper value. In return, I promised more salt or grain for specimens preserved well. They considered only ancient ginseng capable of powerfully replenishing blood and vital energy to be treasure. Younger roots were dug only if the hunters happened to pass them. Earth's market was the opposite. As long as a root could be authenticated as wild, an intact specimen several decades old would attract attention. The difference between the two worlds' values left enormous room in every trade. Wuchan Naga also went to patrol the surrounding area. I was alone in the camp. My phone battery had fallen to 2%, and the power bank was empty. I had no choice but to return temporarily to Earth to recharge. Unfortunately, my arrival point was still the dispensary in my aunt's clinic. As soon as I materialized, I heard someone outside say that several boxes of medicine were missing through the crack beside the door. I saw my aunt handing an inventory list to two community police officers. She looked both furious and worried. The money ID left did nothing to explain how the medicine had vanished into thin air. Outside, Zhang Yali was reporting the missing medicine to the officers. She had discovered the loss. When I pulled open the dispensary door, Zhang Yali and the community police officers looked at me at the same time. It was midsummer, yet I wore a down jacket and still had unmelted snow on the soles of my boots. There was no possible explanation for the scene. I still held a charging cable, and the medicine cabinet door behind me was half open. One officer looked down at the wet marks on the floor, then at my heavy snow boots. Before he could ask a question, I called out, "Annie." Defining the situation as a family problem, my aunt immediately grabbed me. "Were you the one who took the medicine from the dispensary?" I had no choice but to admit that I'd used it. I promised I hadn't misused anything and would pay the full price, but I didn't dare tell her the drugs had saved 2 lives in another world. Once the officers saw it had become a domestic dispute, they left. Zhang Yali cared far more about the safe use of the medicine. She twisted my ear and demanded to know what I'd done with it. I lied that I'd accidentally broken the containers, then deliberately tried to change the subject to the police officer. She didn't believe several boxes of medicine could all have broken at once and kept asking whether I'd secretly treated someone. I repeatedly promised that I hadn't sold the medicine or injected myself recklessly. By the time I finally escaped her grip, she twisted my ear until it burned. I couldn't blame an imaginary friend or invent a patient she might investigate. I only said I'd replace the supplies through proper channels in the future. She made me write down every item I'd taken in front of her. As I did, I realized how dangerous my emergency theft had been. One missing box or extra ampoule could affect the clinic's inventory and the treatment of real patients. Before leaving, the community officer had also warned that prescription drugs couldn't be privately removed. The fact that my aunt agreed to handle the matter internally and prevented a formal case didn't mean it had never happened. The first time I'd used my crossing ability to save lives, I'd also left a clear mark on my life on Earth. From now on, every cross-world action had to account for the consequences on this side. My aunt told me that the officer's grandfather, Elder Zhang, had once been a veteran criminal investigator. Now past 80, he was gravely ill. She even treated him with Changbai mountain ginseng, but the effect had been negligible. Elder Zhang had told me countless stories about solving cases when I was a child, and his son had died in the line of duty. Since I possessed Violet Dragon King ginseng, I wanted to find an opportunity to let him try a small amount of ginseng water. When a patient entered, my aunt returned to work. I took a power bank and crossed back to the campsite in the other world. Before leaving, I photographed the medicine inventory. Any antibiotics, disinfectants, and 4 supplies I needed in the future would have to be purchased legitimately. I couldn't keep making my aunt believe thieves were targeting her clinic. Saving lives couldn't depend on repeatedly creating trouble for my family. An hour later, Wuchan Naga returned first, dropped 2 gold nuggets, and went back out to continue searching. Near dusk, she returned with the Sure siblings. Wuchan Naga brought 2 ancient ginseng roots, each weighing more than a gene. The Sure siblings carried a heavy cloth bag containing 15 or 16 roots, each weighing roughly 5 or 6 liang to 7 liang. There were more roots, and they were older than I'd expected. When they opened the bag, the fragrance of ginseng mingled with the smell of earth. Roots that might have been displayed individually in climate-controlled cases on Earth were now crowded inside coarse cloth with their tendrils tangled together. Shi Yong even complained that the harvest was mediocre, saying they hadn't bothered with younger specimens nearby. I told them to record the areas they hadn't harvested and not to empty the region of medicinal plants the moment they saw their first trading opportunity. A 50 or 60-year-old root was already ancient by Earth's standards, but in the ecology of Mount Lu, it might merely be the seed stock for the next generation. Sustainable gathering over several years was more valuable than carrying away dozens of roots at once. We recorded every item at camp according to who found it and where. We didn't wash the gold nuggets. We only shook loose soil from the ginseng and kept any broken rootlets with the main specimen. Once I returned to Earth, I would give everything a unified identification number. Otherwise, an object might lose its identity during repeated crossings. I immediately took the gold nuggets and ancient ginseng back to Earth in several batches and hid them so nothing could happen during the night. The 2 nuggets were painfully heavy. I could safely carry only one per trip. I separated the ginseng by age and condition, wrapped each root in clean newspaper, and recorded who had found it and where. With this much inventory, relying on memory would eventually create chaos. The 3.5 million yuan had only been the beginning. If these roots were individually appraised and sold, their total value might reach tens of millions. If used for medicinal liquor or treatment, the benefits they created could be even harder to measure. I needed to establish strict inventory and sales rules immediately. Something capable of saving a life couldn't be sold merely by weight. And I couldn't allow multiple buyers to investigate the source at once. I decided that every high-value item would receive an identification number, photographs, and a record of its destination. The Cultural Relics Institute could handle the gold nuggets. Ginseng sales, however, had to be carefully limited. Otherwise, the faster my wealth grew, the greater my risk of exposure would become. I promised the Sure siblings that I'd prepare the supplies Faysure village needed as soon as I returned. To celebrate our harvest, I brought braised pork knuckle, steamed pork belly, roast goose, dompa pork, chicken stewed with potatoes, and apple cider vinegar from restaurants on Earth. Insulated bags filled the entrance of the tent. The instant the rich aroma of meat spread, Sure Feng couldn't help swallowing. Sure Yong tried to preserve a hunter-esque dignity. But after his first bite of pork knuckle, his chopsticks never stopped. It was the first time either sibling had tasted food like this, and they barely spoke while eating. Wuchan Naga had been craving roast goose and showed no restraint either. The entire meal vanished quickly. Afterward, the siblings solemnly promised never to question or reveal my ability to produce objects from thin air. I didn't demand a blood oath. I only explained that if the news spread, all trade would end, and the village might attract enemies it couldn't understand. They had watched me produce medicine and food from nothing, and knew that such an ability would inspire more greed than any single bag of grain. By night, the sounds of battle from Mist Lake had stopped. We took turns keeping watch and approached the battlefield at first light. The land around the shore was devastated for several li. Deep craters covered the ground. Vast ancient trees had been snapped or torn out by the roots. Frozen lumps of reddish-brown blood lay scattered across the snow and mud, carrying a strange fragrance. We didn't walk directly into the center of the battlefield. Wuchan Naga first circled the perimeter, checking tracks and scents to confirm that both spirit beasts had left. Sure Yong and Sure Feng stood watch from high ground. Only then did I approach. The lakeshore remained muddy, and steam still rose from several pits. The force released during the previous night's battle clearly hadn't fully dispersed. Enormous tiger prints mingled with the water bull's heavy hoof prints. One horn had carved a trench dozens of meters long, while tiger claws had left parallel fractures in the rock. A single head-on collision from either beast could have destroyed one of Faysure village's log houses. Some claw marks cut deep into the stone, with the widest large enough to fit my entire hand. A boulder on the shore had split in half, and powder from the impact still clung to the broken faces. I couldn't imagine which shockwave would have shredded our tent if we hadn't retreated. Wuchan Naga confirmed that the frozen blood belonged to the spirit tiger. Anything that had awakened as a spirit was extremely rare. Its blood could replenish blood and vital energy, and could be combined with special herbs for cultivation and healing. We immediately split up to collect it. I found 5 or 6 smaller scabs. Wuchan Naga and the siblings brought back several larger pieces. Together, they filled a large bag, once frozen solid. The blood resembled dark red crystal but remained faintly warm to the touch. I used a knife to lift each piece with a thin layer of the soil beneath it and sealed them separately. Whether the blood could be tested on Earth, how long it would keep, and how it could be used were all unknown. The quantity showed that the spirit tiger had been badly injured, but Wuchan Naga didn't relax. Even gravely wounded, it could still kill all of us with ease, as I bagged the largest lump. Warmth quickly seeped through my glove. She forbade me from touching it directly. Fearing that residual power remained in the blood, I placed only one piece in each bag and then put every bag inside a hard case. That would prevent both contamination and the thawed blood from mixing. We didn't search for the water bull's carcass. There was only blood and scattered hair on the battlefield, which suggested the fight might not be over. The spirit tiger could have retreated to its lair, while the water bull might be hiding on the lake bottom. Tracking either one now would be the same as following its blood trail directly into its jaws. I also wanted to collect lake water and soil, but Wuchan Naga refused. The smell of blood was attracting scavengers, and other spirit tigers might be nearby. The longer we remained, the easier it would be for something to block our escape. In the end, we took only the frozen blood and tree samples already packed. We wouldn't extend our stay for one more unknown specimen. Before leaving, I recorded a wide view of the battlefield and marked its location on my rough map. If our strength and equipment improved in the future, we could return for a systematic investigation. Restraint now wasn't surrender. It was what allowed another expedition to exist. Her unease continued growing. We stopped searching and left the battlefield immediately. During the retreat, I cut arm-length samples from 7 or 8 tree species and tied them to the snowmobile. If Chung Hao confirmed that even one was valuable timber, another of Facier Village's resources would come into view. I kept every sample to the length of my arm and made the cuts as clean as possible. I carved an identification number into the bark and photographed the leaves, trunk, and environment of the original tree. Identifying a species from one piece of wood would be difficult, but the records would at least let workers at the Chung family's factory evaluate density, grain, and machinability. Before we'd gone far, another tiger's roar sounded nearby. This time, it was much closer than the day before. The tiger's roar shook sheets of snow from the branches. Wuchan Naga leaped into the treetops to observe and soon confirmed that an injured spirit tiger lay outside a cave to the north. The Sure siblings immediately demanded that we retreat. I wanted to see a true spirit beast with my own eyes. Wuchan Naga carried me to higher ground and handed me the binoculars. An enormous striped tiger lay before a distant cave. Its fangs protruded from its mouth, and the air around it seemed faintly distorted by some unseen power. One front leg was covered in blood, and a horn had torn open its flank. Yet even lying there, it was more intimidating than an adult elephant on earth. Every breath gently pushed the dead leaves away from its body. The instant I saw its eyes clearly, the spirit tiger abruptly raised its head and looked directly toward our treetop. Several thousand meters hadn't concealed my gaze. It hadn't glanced our way by chance. Once its head turned, its eyes locked steadily onto the reflection from the lenses. It even pushed itself up on its injured front leg. I instinctively lowered the binoculars, but something heavy seemed to press against my chest, briefly stopping my breath. Wuchan Naga didn't ask whether I was certain. The moment she saw the spirit tiger stand, she seized me and withdrew. True wilderness experience didn't mean analyzing how it had discovered us. It meant increasing the distance before the answer arrived. The spirit tiger opened its jaws and roared. A visible wave swept through the forest, wrenching whole swaths of leaves and branches as though a storm had erupted without warning. It found us. Run, before I could put away the binoculars. Wuchan Naga had already grabbed the back of my coat. The treetop dropped rapidly beneath my feet, and the impact of our landing pushed the snowmobile down into the snow. I shoved the binoculars inside my jacket and tried the ignition. The engine failed once, then roared to life on the second attempt. Wuchan Naga carried me down from the tree and landed directly on the snowmobile. I opened the throttle fully. With the Sure siblings close behind, we fled for half an hour without stopping. Only after confirming the spirit tiger hadn't followed did we rest at the cave we previously used as a campsite. I still couldn't understand how it had sensed my gaze from several thousand meters away. Wuchan Naga told me that spirit beasts weren't born that way. They transformed only after ordinary animals underwent long cultivation. Among tens or even hundreds of thousands of ferocious beasts, not one might awaken. They possessed more than powerful bodies. They accumulated experience, recognized traps, and even understood cultivation. Ordinary hunters could use numbers and tools to surround and kill a giant beast. Against a spirit beast, those same advantages might simply deliver more prey to its door. Wuchan Naga said that high-level spirit beasts could even remember a person's scent and weapon. The fact that this one was injured and hadn't pursued us didn't mean it would spare us next time. We'd taken blood from its battlefield and watched it from afar. No one knew whether it could connect those actions. I recorded the encounter on my phone, the observation distance, the effect of its roar, the time spent retreating, and the spirit tiger's injuries. Every list of wealth needed a list of dangers beside it. If I told future companions that the mountains contained gold and ginseng but failed to mention that an injured spirit tiger could detect a gaze from thousands of meters away, I would be trading their lives for merchandise. After reaching the cave, we checked for fuel traces and tracks left by the snowmobile. If the spirit tiger could follow scents, riding directly back to Facier village might lead danger to the villagers. Wuchan Naga guided us across a stretch of rocky ground. while the Sure siblings used branches to obscure obvious tracks. Only after confirming nothing followed did we continue. I covered the lenses to prevent another reflection. Advanced equipment could let you see farther, but it could also allow a distant predator to find you. Every tool had a cost. The spirit tiger had taught me that lesson in the most direct way possible. The adult spirit tiger had lived for at least 200 or 300 years. It was no longer merely a powerful animal. It was an intelligent life form with supernatural strength. For people at our current level, approaching it was the same as suicide. This expedition had shown me the wealth of trade between two worlds. It had also shown me the true upper limits of this world. I was only rank 1. Wuchan Naga was at the upper stage of rank 7. Yet even she could do nothing but flee from an injured spirit tiger. If I wanted to leave Mount Lu and enter the kingdom of Nanling and the greater dynasties beyond it, I needed to increase my strength quickly. I also had to turn my crossing ability and modern supplies into sustainable advantages. Getting rich was only the first step. Living long enough to control that wealth would be far harder. When I woke the next morning, I had managed 3 complete chi circuits during the night, much faster than when I began. I asked how long Wuchan Naga needed. She counted only to 20 before her true chi completed an entire circuit. The difference sobered me completely. Completing one circuit still required my full concentration. The slightest lapse sent me along the wrong path. She could circulate chi while speaking and return it to her dantian within a count of 20. The distance between rank 1 and the upper stage of rank 7 couldn't be closed by practicing for a few extra days. We packed our camp and returned to Feisher village near dusk. Along the way, Shi Yong and Shi Feng hunted a burrowing pig, an elk, and 9 snow chickens. The villagers cheered when they saw the food. Mount Lu was about to enter a period of extreme cold lasting half a year. The beasts would hide, and Feisher village often survived on only 1 meal a day. During the hardest years, some villagers starved to death. Meat was already hanging to dry at the village entrance. Yet the storage building was shockingly empty. More than 20 log houses had to survive half a year on this harvest. No wonder the hunters kept returning to the dangerous mountains before the winter sealed every route. Shi Feng and I inspected the grain store together. Only a thin layer of coarse grain covered the bottoms of the earthenware jars, and very little salt remained. There appeared to be plenty of dried meat, but divided among the entire village each day. It wouldn't last long. Children and elders would have their shares reduced first. Only the hunters received an extra mouthful, so they could maintain the strength to hunt. 1,000 jin of grain sounded like a great deal. Divided among dozens of people over half a year, it was merely a basic supplement. I decided the first shipment would exceed the chief's requested quantity and include inexpensive, shelf-stable sweet potatoes, compressed food, and canned goods. Farming trials could wait until next season. For now, everyone needed to survive the winter. Before long, the old chief came to our lodging. The Shi siblings had told him that I was willing to trade supplies for local goods. He first thanked me for saving Shi Gan and Shi Ling, then asked whether I could provide grain, clothing, iron tools, and medicine for the winter. I can. I want gold nuggets, ancient ginseng, animal hides, the tiger skeleton, and some timber. The old chief couldn't understand why I wanted wood, but he raised no objection. Trees were the one thing Mount Lu would never lack. He had Shi Feng translate and confirm every item one by one. I also made it clear that I wouldn't take the sacred stone from the altar or ask villagers to die inside spirit tiger territory. Everything had to be gathered during ordinary hunting or in safe areas. If trade cost the villagers their lives, it could never last. Then we discussed ownership. Individual hunters could decide whether to trade small ginseng roots and goldstones they personally collected. Stores belonging to the hunter's hall, complete tiger skeletons, and communal game required joint approval from the chief and the hunters. That prevented me from bypassing the village to depress individual prices, while the chief couldn't seize a hunter's private property. We expressed prices as lists of goods rather than converting them into Earth's currency. Both sides could see exactly how many jin of grain, how much salt, and how many sets of clothing would be exchanged for each local item. After completing the first shipment, we could adjust for condition and demand. We wouldn't negotiate from nothing every time. The old chief required me to guarantee delivery before the extreme cold arrived. In return, I required the village not to promise the same objects to merchants from Qingfeng town before delivery. Commitments had to run both ways if waiting was to become a real order. Medicine wouldn't be exchanged by weight for local goods. It would be supplied according to actual need. Continued treatment for Shi Gan and Shi Ling wasn't part of the transaction. Nor would I ask a price before providing emergency care. Ordinary disinfectants and dressings would be kept as communal inventory and issued by a designated record keeper. We reached an agreement Faysure Village would hand over its existing local goods and continue collecting for me. I would provide enough grain for the extreme winter, along with daily necessities and medical supplies. Once the negotiation ended, I re-examined Shurgan and Shurling. Both had recovered 60 or 70%. Their infections were controlled, and they needed only continued dressing changes and time for the wounds to close. They knelt on one knee to thank me for saving their lives and promised to serve me in the future. I pulled them to their feet. Shurgan had lost an arm and would need a long time before he could hunt again. Shurling couldn't strain herself merely because her fever had broken. Their survival was enough. I didn't need to exchange the debt of saving their lives for another chance to risk those same lives. After treating their wounds, the old chief led me into the hunter's hall. Shi Yong and Shi Feng waited beside a large table. A pile of violet dragon king ginseng roots lay across it, several more than 300 years old. Beside them were 5 gold nuggets as wide as the rim of a bowl. Farther in lay 2 nine-tailed fox pelts with a strange luster. Each pelt was large enough to cover half a bed, and all 9 tails remained intact. When the firelight touched the white fur, it reflected a faint stream of silver. The Shi siblings had failed to catch 1 nine-tailed fox during the day. Yet 2 complete older pelts rested here. The village had accumulated far more than I'd seen. The old chief had placed every bargaining chip Faysure Village possessed on the table. Now it was my turn to honor my promise. The 2 nine-tailed fox pelts were almost identical to those on Wuchan Naga's bed, complete, snow white, and shimmering with a strange natural luster. The old chief presented his exchange list: 1,000 jin of grain, 100 jin of salt, 50 sets of winter clothing, along with swords, bows and arrows, and medicine for treating injuries. I recorded every quantity on my phone. The 50 sets of winter clothing had to be sized for the Kila's height. Standard one-size-fits-all garments would never fit. The salt needed moisture-proof packaging, and every medicine had to be labeled by purpose. I couldn't cut corners with the swords or bows either. The hunters would use them against gigantic beasts capable of fighting back. I had Shi Yong measure the shoulder width, arm length, and foot length of several adult hunters, marking each with cord before converting the measurements into Earth sizes. Kila children were also taller than children of the same age on Earth, so winter clothing couldn't be bought by age alone. No matter how warm a garment was, it was useless if no one could put it on. For the grain, I asked about the village's cookware and storage conditions. Rice required knowing how to prepare it, while sweet potatoes would be easier. Instant noodles and canned food were suited only to travel or emergency supplements. The first shipment needed to contain food they understood and could store, not a pile of unfamiliar packaging thrown into a warehouse. The cost of everything on Earth was far below the value of any 300-year-old ginseng on the table. I accepted the complete list without haggling and voluntarily added another 500 jin of grain in exchange for the intact tiger skeleton in the hunter's hall. When the chief heard I would provide 500 extra jin, he made sure Feng confirm it repeatedly. To me, it cost only a few thousand yuan. To the village, it might mean fewer people starving during the extreme winter. The skeleton I would receive was neither their food nor their sacred object, making the addition acceptable to both sides. I needed time to prepare the shipment and gave them a delivery window of 7 to 10 days. To establish trust, I didn't take any goods from the table in advance. We agreed that I would receive them only after delivery and inspection were complete. The old chief visibly trusted me more after that and promised that if the first trade went smoothly, I would forever be Faysure Village's most honored friend. I desperately wanted to take the ginseng and gold home immediately. Yet I pulled my hand back. If our first partnership began with me taking the goods, and then asking them to wait for someone capable of vanishing into thin air to return, I wouldn't feel secure in their position either. Leaving the objects in the hunter's hall meant staking everything on my own credibility. Wuchan Naga decided to remain in the village and cultivate while she waited for me. I took the timber samples and crossed back to Earth. Before I left, she cleared an open area near the fixed arrival point, so I couldn't materialize on top of supplies or collide with someone. We agreed that I would return to the same lodging in 7 days for delivery if I was delayed. Faysure Village wouldn't send anyone into the mountains to look for me, nor would it transport the goods to the cabin in advance. I temporarily left the binoculars with her so she and the Shi siblings could continue monitoring the Mist Lake area. The injured spirit tiger might alter its range. So all gathering near Spirit Tiger Valley would stop for now. No trade was important enough to justify another death while they waited for me. After so many days away, hearing traffic and human voices again felt almost unreal. I showered and charged my devices at the apartment. When the phone came back on, messages flooded the screen. The warm air from the air conditioner, car horns downstairs, and the phone's endless vibration were familiar and strangely foreign at once. Several days had passed in the other world, and the same number had passed on Earth. Since time was synchronized, I couldn't remain unreachable for long or completely abandon my life in either world. There were 75 missed calls. More than 60 came from Zhen Minghua, Chen Zhongxing. My mother, my aunt, Cheng Hao, and Chen Ling had all tried to contact me as well. I first called my mother and aunt to say I was safe, then saved Zhen Minghua's number separately. More than 60 calls showed that she wasn't merely asking a casual price. It also showed that my phone number had passed from the institute to an outsider. There was clearly a gap in the confidentiality Chen Zhongxing had promised. I needed to question him in person. The apartment lock showed no damage, and the curtains hadn't moved. Even so, I inspected the wine vat, ancient ginseng, and gold nugget hiding places to make sure no one had entered. Zhen Minghua finding my phone number didn't mean she found my address, but I could no longer assume the apartment was completely safe. Luna was still spreading rumors that I was unemployed, broke, and had been thrown out by my family. I had no intention of responding. Cheng Hao had sent even more messages. He complained about the lumber mill, then said he finally confessed his feelings to the girl he liked, only to discover she was already dating a rich man's son. I observed 3 seconds of silence for his love life, then called him. The moment he answered, he cursed me for disappearing and asked whether I'd gone off to make a fortune. I said we'd discuss my fortune later. Right now, I had a purchase order that could make us real money. His voice immediately became more energetic when he heard it was business. Get Chen Ling and meet me at the Qingchun food stalls in half an hour. I need your help. Feisher Village had to survive the extreme winter. I needed to complete the first supply purchase within 7 days. The transaction wasn't enormous, but it would determine whether I could continue receiving ancient ginseng, gold nuggets, hides, and tiger bones in the future. When Cheng Hao and Chen Ling saw me, they stared at my face for a long time. After repeated body and marrow cleansing and my breakthrough to rank 1, my skin, physique, and bearing had all changed. They thought I'd had plastic surgery. I brushed it off by saying I'd been exercising consistently. Cheng Hao walked around me and squeezed my shoulder, wondering if I'd taken some kind of hormone. Chen Ling was even more direct, asking whether I'd secretly enrolled in a residential boot camp after the breakup. I laughed and shoved grilled skewers into their hands, refusing to let the subject continue. Then I gave them the explanation I'd prepared. A private organization has commissioned me to purchase supplies for a remote mountain area in western China. The details are confidential. You'll only handle the purchasing, and I'll pay you a 10% commission on the cost. I divided the commission into 2 parts. Since Chun Ling understood grain and liquor, she would handle rice, sweet potatoes, rice liquor, and warehouse space. Cheng Hao had contacts and access to vehicles, so he would handle packaged food, salt, clothing, shoes, and transportation. Each saw only the relevant list and didn't need to know about medicine, bladed tools, or the final destination. The delivery point would be a warehouse Chen Ling could rent short-term, not my apartment or any new home. Suppliers would bring the goods there. Once my friends inspected everything and left, I could transfer the shipment alone in batches. That would make the bulk purchase look like a normal, consolidated order instead of sending trucks repeatedly to a private residence. I gave every category acceptable substitutes if one brand was out of stock. They could choose another with an equivalent shelf life. Clothing could be any color, but had to be durable. Salt couldn't come loose from an unknown source. My friends could make practical decisions without allowing one minor detail to stall the entire order. Every payment would be made by bank transfer, and they would keep invoices whenever possible. The quantities weren't unusual for a commercial order, but the combination of food, clothing, and tools might attract questions. An aid project for a remote region made more sense than a private individual stockpiling supplies. The explanation wasn't perfect, but it was more stable than inventing a different story every time. Although the project didn't sound like something I would normally do, they stopped questioning me once they understood it was paid work. The story couldn't explain every detail, but it covered the rice, winter clothes, and medicine. As for the measurements suited to people nearly 2 meters tall, I said the mountain residents were unusually large. We would use the rented warehouse for delivery, so my friends never saw me cross worlds. I put Qinling in charge of 1,000 jin of rice. She told me that quantity was nothing to a distillery, which consumed several thousand jin of grain in a single production run. Remembering how much more valuable Faisher Village's goods were than anything I supplied, I added 1,000 jin of sweet potatoes. They were inexpensive, stored well, and would help fill stomachs during the extreme cold. Chunghao would handle compressed biscuits, canned meat, instant noodles, salt. 50 sets of winter clothing and snow boots large enough for hunters close to 2 meters tall, and a large quantity of thick socks. I specifically required food packaging that tolerated low temperatures and had a long shelf life. The clothing didn't need a famous brand. Only thickness and durability mattered. The Keela traveled through forests, where decorative zippers and ornaments would easily catch on branches. Their gloves also needed to allow a firm grip on a bow or knife. Ordinary urban winter gloves wouldn't do. I would purchase medicine through my aunt's legitimate channels. Swords and crossbows were regulated and couldn't be casually bought at a market. So I decided to look for legal tools and hunting equipment instead. Practicality mattered more than whether something resembled an ancient weapon. Axes, saws, machetes, and outdoor knives could be delivered first as long as their purchase and transportation complied with the law. Before buying crossbows or long blades, I had to confirm the legal boundaries. The other world's lack of regulation was no reason to create an illegal purchasing record on Earth. I also removed every medical category I didn't understand and kept only disinfectants. Dressings, bandages, and common medicine my aunt could manage lawfully. Shirgan and Shirling had already proven that professional treatment couldn't be replaced. I couldn't turn Faisher Village into a place for experimenting with drugs. Over barbecue, we listed every category, specification, and delivery date. The order would also temporarily increase both my friends' income. As we neared the end of our discussion, I noticed a business van parked across the road. Someone inside kept looking our way. At first, I assumed it was a coincidence. The van still hadn't left when I went to pay the bill. After entering rank 1, my sight was sharper than before. I could see the driver comparing me to a photograph on his phone. He didn't approach, apparently waiting for someone with the authority to make a decision. Half an hour later, a red sports car stopped at the curb. A young woman stepped out, crossed the road, and walked straight toward me. The first words from her mouth were my name. "Mr. Su, I've finally found you." The young woman introduced herself as Zhen Mingyue, the person who had called me repeatedly. Her business card read Mingyue Group. Only then did I learn that she was the granddaughter of Zhen Wu, a famous entrepreneur in Nandu. Instead of displaying her wealth first, she showed me a summary of the hospital's diagnosis and contact information for Elder D. The patient's name and admission date matched public news reports. And Chen Zhongxing sent me a message confirming her identity. At least I could rule out the possibility that she'd heard of the Ginseng King and was pretending to be a family member. I still didn't admit in the street that I had the root. I only said I was willing to hear the full situation. The food stalls were crowded, and Cheng Hao and Chen Ling were at the table. Any discussion of price, storage location, or medicinal effects had to occur somewhere I could control who heard it. She dressed with polished efficiency, but hadn't brought a crowd of bodyguards. She ordered the people in the business van to remain where they were. The paper and printing of her card were exquisite, yet the knuckles around her cup were faintly white. Several days of searching had clearly exhausted her patience. The news had previously reported that Elder Zhen was hospitalized in critical condition. Zhen Mingyue explained that she spent days having people follow the clues Chen Zhongxing provided and had only located me tonight. Cheng Hao and Chen Ling were both astonished. An heiress arriving in a sports car and urgently seeking me out clearly wasn't ordinary business. Cheng Hao nudged me with an elbow and whispered to ask when I met a woman of this status. Chen Ling didn't joke. She looked at Zhen Mingyue's reddened eyes and voluntarily moved aside to make room. Zhen Mingyue hoped to speak privately. I didn't want to abandon my friends without warning and proposed meeting the next day. She asked to stay instead. As long as she could discuss the Ginseng King as soon as possible, she didn't care that we were sitting at an open-air food stall. She told her driver and assistants to remain in the van, then sat on a plastic stool. Cooking smoke, noise, and curious stares were clearly foreign to her normal life. Yet she never asked anyone to clear the area. She only kept confirming when I could review the medical records and when I might decide whether to show her the actual route. Chen Ling offered her a skewer of grilled vegetables. She thanked her and ate only 2 bites, never taking her attention from me. Cheng Hao tried several times to ask what a Ginseng King was, but I silenced him with a look. It was enough for my friends to know I was doing business. We couldn't discuss the quantities or storage location of life-saving medicine in public. I asked Jin Mingwei to send the most important medical opinions to my phone first. With all identification numbers and information about other patients removed, she complied and didn't use her corporate influence to demand that I immediately get into her car and go to the hospital. Her respect for my boundaries was another reason I decided to help. I told her that a ginseng king wasn't an ordinary health supplement. Even if I agreed to sell, I couldn't guarantee it would cure every illness. She acknowledged that the hospital no longer had a curative treatment and said they only wanted one more chance for the old man. She didn't ask me to guarantee the outcome, which made me more willing to continue. She also said Elder D could first inspect the certificate for the same ginseng before any transaction. She wouldn't ask me to prescribe anything privately. I would be responsible only for providing the authentic herb. A physician would decide whether it was appropriate, and the family would make an informed choice. By keeping the three responsibilities separate, a desire to save someone wouldn't turn into mutual accusations afterward. Her eyes rapidly reddened when she spoke of Elder Zhun's condition. The tiny piece of rootlet Chen Zhongxing had retained had already helped the dying old man stabilize temporarily. She believed the complete ginseng king could save her grandfather and was determined to buy it at any cost. Her persistence didn't offend me. She hadn't begun by discussing her family, status, or money. She had called again and again for a loved one and personally followed me to a roadside food stall. At least her devotion to her family was genuine. I filled everyone's cup. Stop addressing me so formally. We're about the same age. Drink this, and I'll help you. Zhen Mingwei raised the cup and drained it immediately. The liquor was strong, and she coughed twice, but still inverted the empty cup for me to see. I hadn't promised to give away the ginseng king or guarantee a cure. I had only given her an opportunity to inspect the root and negotiate in person. She understood, and the tension finally left her shoulders. I asked Chenling to leave and begin preparing the grain, then told Cheng how to come to the apartment with me. Inside, I first handed him the samples from 7 or 8 tree species ID brought back. Every sample carried an identification number linked to photographs of the original tree on my phone. I asked him to perform only preliminary cutting and identification inside his family's factory. He couldn't send anything to an outside laboratory or post photographs in timber groups. If one of the species appeared on a protected list, questions about its origin would arrive faster than any offer. Cheng Hao asked whether the wood was part of my mysterious business. I only said the supply wasn't stable and told him not to promise his father anything yet. He agreed to test density, hardness, moisture content, and machining behavior and contact me with the results. Take them back to the factory and identify the species, material properties, and value. The more detail, the better. Cheng Hao carried the samples away. I left the apartment door open and invited Zhen Mingwei to sit. The door had to remain open. This was our first meeting alone, and the transaction involved medicinal materials worth tens of millions. Avoiding any situation that could be misunderstood protected us both. She didn't care about the apartment's shabby condition. The moment she sat down, she opened the medical record photographs on her phone. Now she needed to tell me exactly how ill Elder Zhen was. I also had to decide how the ginseng should be used. Zhen Mingwei said Elder Zhen was advanced in age and several underlying conditions were deteriorating at once. His organs were steadily failing. The hospital could maintain him but had no curative treatment. She described the changes over the past week in chronological order. First, he had lost the ability to eat and slept continuously. Then several indicators approached critical levels. After the rootlet was administered, he briefly regained consciousness, drank a little porridge, and developed a steadier pulse. The effects weren't rumors from the news. They were changes recorded daily by the hospital. I asked her to close every page involving irrelevant private information and retain only the physician's opinions and drug response. Knowing more wouldn't help me. I needed to determine whether a rootlet from the same plant had truly worked and whether a professional team would control future doses. Laboratory results, monitoring records, and consultation notes passed across the screen one after another. I couldn't understand every figure, but the worsening trend was obvious. It wasn't one organ suddenly becoming diseased. His entire body had reached its limit. At the most dangerous moment, Elder D, an expert in traditional Chinese medicine, had used the rootlet retained by the Cultural Relics Institute and pulled him back from the brink of death. Elder D was president of the affiliated hospital of Nandu University of Chinese Medicine and came from a family of traditional physicians. He judged that the ginseng had grown for at least 300 years and could replenish Elder Zhen's failing blood. vital energy, and life force. With more of the herb, the old man might not only survive, but recover to a relatively stable condition. I refuse to describe the Violet Dragon King ginseng as some immortal cure. Every powerful tonic had rules and risks, especially for an elderly patient with several underlying illnesses. After she received the herb, a physician like Elder D had to determine the dosage. No one could casually boil it the way Wuchan Naga prepared ginseng water. Even I had suffered nosebleeds and diarrhea after drinking ginseng broth, and later the snow chicken's medicinal power had nearly torn my body apart. Elder Jun was far more fragile. Any idea that a larger dose will work faster might kill him. Without explaining the origin of my own severe reaction, I explicitly required them to begin with an amount no larger than a tiny section of rootlet. Zhen Mingyue accepted the condition and promised to record the weight of every piece removed, the preparation method, and the patient's response. If anything abnormal occurred, they would stop immediately and let the doctors handle it. Shi wouldn't come to me demanding some secret prescription. Possessing the herb didn't make me qualified to practice medicine. Zhen Mingyue stood and bowed solemnly. I know it may be a national treasure, but for my grandfather's sake, I still beg you to sell it to me. It's called Violet Dragon King Ginseng. I removed the root authenticated by the Cultural Relics Institute from the hidden compartment in my wardrobe and took out its certificate. As I unfolded layer after layer of newspaper, the room quickly filled with its rich fragrance. Zhen Mingyue stared at the violet root, and even her breathing softened. She took out her phone to photograph it, then looked at me for permission first. Only after I nodded did she record the rhizome crown, main root, and complete network of tendrils one by one. Then she compared them to the test photographs Chen Zhongxing had provided. Every feature matched, and the last doubt left her eyes. ID originally planned to find an appropriate time to auction it, but the first ginseng root had already given me enough capital to begin trading between the worlds, and I still had other ancient roots. Rather than publicize it for months while waiting for buyers, I could use this one to prove its true medicinal effect. More importantly, it could save a life. You can have this root. Zhen Mingyue didn't dare reach for it. She only asked the price. I rewrapped the ginseng and refused to exploit her desperation. The Cultural Relics Institute had estimated that an auction might bring 30 million yuan, though real bidding could push it higher. The publicity, however, would tell far more people that the Ginseng King existed. To me, confidentiality and a fast transaction were valuable too. I didn't demand an absurd price. I asked her to make an offer based on the current valuation that we could both accept. She immediately contacted her secretary to bring a checkbook and proposed the following arrangement: 30 million yuan paid now, followed by another 20 million if Elder Jin clearly improved after treatment. I didn't let the potential total of 50 million overwhelm my judgment. The initial 30 million had to come from a lawful account belonging to her or the group. The contract would describe the authenticated status and present condition of the herb. The second payment would depend on staged hospital records, not a word like cured that no one could guarantee. The confidentiality terms also went into the contract. The Jun family could disclose the herb's name to the attending physicians, but not the seller's identity, address, or details of the transaction. If they needed similar medicine in the future, they had to contact me first and couldn't send anyone to investigate the source. She didn't negotiate over those terms. She only asked to complete delivery as quickly as possible. I required the hospital records to determine clear improvement, not a verbal expression of gratitude. She agreed to include the medical outcome, additional payment, and herb delivery in the agreement, along with her promise to keep my identity and address confidential. The deal wouldn't produced the theoretically highest price, but it would turn the root into cash quickly and establish the first genuine case documenting the Violet Dragon King Ginseng's effect. I agreed. Her secretary arrived 10 minutes later. A black briefcase landed on the table, followed by the contract and a check. 30 million yuan was printed on the paper, yet I didn't sign immediately. I could sell the ginseng. I couldn't let a single check by my secret with it. Zhen Mingyue wrote me a cashier's check for 30 million yuan in person. After verifying the bank and corporate seals, I accepted the check and handed over the Violet Dragon King ginseng with its certificate. The secretary also provided corporate authorization documents and contact information, and we each retained one copy of the contract. We reconfirmed the root's identification number, photographs, and certificate seal, ensuring that it was the exact specimen tested by the Cultural Relics Institute. Zhen Mingyue put on gloves before accepting it, and didn't even crush the outer newspaper. I also told her to keep it away from light and control the temperature during transport. Rather than sealing the fresh root in plastic for hours, she immediately had the driver adjust the car's temperature and notified the hospital to prepare a specialized storage container. The ginseng had been sold, but I still didn't want something capable of saving a life ruined on the way to the hospital. The agreement stated that the herb was delivered in its current condition, that a professional physician would determine the dosage, and that both parties would keep the identities involved in the transaction confidential. The secretary handed me every page for confirmation. After signing, I photographed the complete contract for my records. The larger the sum, the more dangerous it was to rely on the words, "I trust you." Zhen Mingyue carefully wrapped the herb, thanked me again on behalf of Elder Zhen and Mingyue Group, then left immediately to arrange treatment. Once the room became quiet, I stared at the check for a long time, together with the 3.5 million from the gold nugget. I now possessed wealth I'd once never dared imagine, yet I still lived in a small room in an urban village, with people passing outside at every hour and no convenient way to move bulk goods. Ancient ginseng filled the wardrobe. Gold nuggets had been hidden beneath the bed. A huge vat of ginseng liquor stood in the kitchen. One visit from the landlord to check the water meter, or a neighbor knocking on the wrong door, could expose something I couldn't explain. This place was no longer suitable as a transfer point between two worlds. The fact that Zhen Mingyue had found me here so quickly already proved the address was no longer secure. She hadn't explained her investigation, but I could make a reasonable guess. My phone number, surveillance footage at the institute, payments, or travel records, any one of them could lead someone to the urban village. She only wanted to save her grandfather and meant no harm. The next person looking for a ginseng king might be different. I checked the entrance and hallways. There were no vehicles lingering outside, but I still decided to move as soon as possible. I also couldn't keep concentrating every valuable object in one wardrobe. My residence, warehouse, and public meeting place should be separate. Then anyone who found one location wouldn't see all my secrets at once. I needed a detached home with few neighbors, strong privacy, a yard, and plenty of storage. It would reduce my risk whether I was crossing worlds or storing grain, timber, medicine, and valuable goods from the mountains. A villa was no longer a luxury. It was a necessary base. I listed my requirements: detached house and yard, underground space, garage, established security, and preferably a position at the edge of the development. The building itself could be ordinary. The important thing was preventing anyone outside from seeing what I moved in and out every day. I was about to contact a real estate agent when Cheng Hao called. He had already cut and examined the timber samples. His voice trembled with excitement. "Where did you get this freshly cut wood?" I told him only to give me the conclusions first. The samples contained at least golden thread nanmu, premium cedar, nanmu, and what might be sandalwood. Several other species were unfamiliar, yet they had the same high density, beautiful grain, and natural fragrance. Cheng Hao had cut every sample into thin slices, cross-sections, and lengthwise sections. Clear grain showed in the photographs. Several pieces had high moisture content, but lacked the harsh odor of ordinary freshly felled timber. The fragrance became stronger after planing, and the cutting edges of his tools wore down faster than expected. His father refused to believe they came through any ordinary, commercial channel and asked whether they were from a primeval forest overseas. I confirmed no place of origin and told them to record their professional assessment internally without asking public prices. If the wood belonged to a protected species, questions about its source would arrive faster than money. Cheng Hao said the most obvious difference during cutting was hardness. Several samples produced fine sawdust and smooth, oily cut faces. Ordinary kiln-dried timber never had that satisfying weight. His father needed only one look before suspending the factory sale agreement he had been preparing to sign. Some of those species were strictly protected on Earth. Logging them without permission would violate the law. That meant I couldn't claim that wood from the other world had been harvested domestically or dump it onto the market in bulk. But if I could complete the authentication and design a lawful channel for provenance and sales, the unused ancient trees of Mount Lu would become another enormous resource. I asked Cheng Hao, "How much is golden thread nanmu actually worth?" The other end of the line went silent for a moment. "It depends on the age and quality. True ancient timber can be terrifyingly expensive." I looked out the window. In the other world's snowy forest, there wasn't only one ancient tree so wide 10 people couldn't encircle it. The trees continued beyond the horizon. If golden thread nanmu truly grew there, I hadn't seen a forest. I'd seen a treasury whose coordinates could never be revealed. But I also thought about Fasher Village and the mountain beasts. Trees were commodities on Earth. But on Mount Lu, they formed hunting grounds, shelter, and the foundation of the soil and water. The fact that no registered owner existed didn't give me the right to clear the forest. Any development had to begin with small samples, naturally fallen timber, and clearly safe areas. Then I would determine whether the village's consent was also necessary. Nor had I tested the limits of my crossing ability with gigantic timber. The snowmobile could pass through, but that didn't mean a tree trunk dozens of meters long could. Cutting it into pieces would reduce its value. Equipment, workers, and evidence at the site would expand the circle of secrecy. Timber had to move much more slowly than ginseng and gold. Cheng Hao gave me an example. An ancient piece of golden thread nanmu several thousand years old had once sold for 17 million yuan after it was processed and displayed. The highest offer reached several hundred million. My breathing quickened. One tree might be worth even more than the ginseng king ID just sold, but a root fit inside a backpack. A trunk so wide 10 people couldn't encircle it, couldn't be moved by strength alone. Felling, sectioning, crossing, and storage would each require equipment and concealment. Cheng Hao explained that usable value also depended on cavities, cracks, oil content, and intact length. A huge exterior didn't guarantee sound would inside. And sensational online prices couldn't be applied to every tree. I told him to treat the highest figures as references and not promise his father they would become rich. We agreed that next time I would bring more samples, not whole logs. If I found naturally fallen and already dried timber, I would test that first. Living trees would remain untouched. That would reduce logging while allowing us to test crossing, transportation, and processing. Ancient trees, so wide 10 people couldn't encircle them, grew everywhere on Mount Lu, and many might already be thousands of years old. If the samples truly matched rare species on Earth, any single tree might be worth an astonishing amount. Are you certain one sample is golden thread nanmu? My family has worked in timber for all these years. We wouldn't mistake golden thread nanmu. The grain contains fine golden threads that shine in the light, and it has a distinctive fragrance. He sent me photographs of the cut face. Fine lines between warm yellow grain really did shift with the light. In the mountains, ID noticed only the tree's size. I never imagined one inconspicuous sample could make both Cheng Hao and his father lose their composure. Cheng Hao immediately asked whether I could obtain more. I couldn't tell him entire mountains were covered in such trees. I only said the supply channel was stable and the total cost wouldn't exceed half the market price. The more he heard, the more excited he became. He proposed that his father delay selling the factory and wait for my next batch of samples. That suited me perfectly. The first step in bringing otherworldly wood to Earth wasn't large-scale sales. It was confirming the species, material properties, and safety. The second was controlling the quantity and establishing a legal, explainable process for manufacturing and distribution. If any link failed, the profit would become a liability.